All right, everybody, welcome to part 5 of the Reddit build. My name is Shadi, and if you are new here, please check out part 1. It will be available somewhere at the top of the screen. Also, I have created a Discord server for anyone to join to get direct access to me to ask questions about the project or really about anything, and also to meet and connect with others in the community. So please join that. The link is in the description, and I would love to see you in there. So in the last video, I mentioned that I was going to try to conclude this series in part 5, but I've decided that part 5 is going to cover pretty much all of the remaining functionality of the app, and then I'm going to create a much shorter part 6 that is going to mainly focus on hosting and deployment and security rules with Firebase, and that will be just a pretty short and quick part to cover all of the deployment process. So last time we were able to cover an absolutely massive amount of material and added some major features of our app. We added the ability to join and leave any community, create posts within those communities, and we figured out how to upload our post images to our Firebase Storage bucket. And we also got to learn how to use Firestore batch rights, as well as build our own custom React hooks. And now we're going to work on all of the remaining features of our app, such as voting on posts, commenting on posts, and basically any other of the missing pieces. So we are definitely on the home stretch here, and we are getting closer and closer to having a finished product. All right, you guys, so we're going to start off with handling the deletion of posts functionality, because now that we can create them, it would be nice if we could delete them as well. And it's not an overly complicated function, so we might as well just get it out of the way now. All right, so I am inside of this postItem component here. And just underneath this loading state here, I'm going to create a new function called handleDelete. And this is going to be an asynchronous function. Okay, so we're creating this function, but we also have this onDeletePost function that we saw that we defined in our usePost hook here. So you might be wondering, why do we have two delete functions? And that's a really good question. This function is actually going to call this onDeletePost function, and the onDeletePost function is going to be responsible for actually updating our database and state. But the handleDelete function is going to handle the error handling for us inside of this component and a few other things like event propagation, but I don't want to get too deep into that until we get to it. Okay, so inside of our handleDelete function, I'm going to create a try catch block, and at the top of our try block, let's create a variable called success. And this variable is going to represent a successful response from the onDeletePost function. So basically, we click on a post that we want to delete. That post is sent to the onDeletePost function. The onDeletePost function is going to reach out to our Firestore database and delete that document. When that is successful, it is going to return to this function a success message, and then we will know inside of this function that the post has successfully been deleted. So we're getting some errors here, and the reason that is because our prop type for this function is currently this, and TypeScript is saying, well, this function that you declared up here definitely does not match what is going on down here, so we do need to fix that. Okay, so to fix our type declaration here, we're going to change this to a function that accepts an argument of type post, and this function is going to return a promise of type Boolean. And it's returning a promise because the onDeletePost function is asynchronous, because it's asynchronously communicating with our database. And in JavaScript, asynchronous functions can only return a promise. So our onDeletePost function is going to attempt to delete the document from our Firestore database, and if it succeeds, it's going to return true, and if it fails, it's going to return false. And that is what this success variable represents. I hope that makes sense, and that should make more sense when we actually write out this onDeletePost function, which is coming very soon. And this helps us with our error handling, because we can say, if there is no success, if the onDeletePost function was not successful, then we want to throw a new error and say that we failed to delete the post. Then down here, we can set our error state, which we can create right now. So we can say const error, set error is equal to useState. We can set it equal to false. Then down here, we can actually call set error and set it equal to error.message. And the message in this case is just going to be this failed to delete post string here that we're throwing in the error here. Okay, so if we make it past this if statement, we can just throw a log in here saying that the post was successfully deleted. And there are a few more minor things that we're going to add to this function when we create the single page post view in a little bit, but I will come back to that when we get to it. And then what we want to do is add this function to the onClick of our onDelete here. We want to add the function handleDelete. So let's come back up here, and now let's actually go work on this onDeletePost function in our usePost hook. So we just saw a few minutes ago that this function is going to need to take in an argument of type post, so we can add that in here. and that it's also going to need to return a Boolean promise. And in TypeScript, we specify the return type after these parentheses here with a colon, and then we can just type the return type. And in this case, that is going to be a promise of type Boolean. And just one more time for clarity, because this function is asynchronous, we have to wrap the return type in a promise. So you can see that we have a compiler error on our return type there. And this is basically just TypeScript saying, well, you're telling me that this function is supposed to return a promise of type Boolean, but you're not returning anything. So to make this go away, all we have to do is just return a value of that type. So this function is going to do a total of 3 things. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to check if the post that we're trying to delete has an image attached to it. And if it does, it's going to delete it from our Firebase Storage bucket. Then it's going to actually delete the post document itself in our Firestore Database. Then it's just going to update our Recoil state so that we do not see the deleted post on our UI. Okay, so let's create a try catch block here. And I'm just going to write out some comments to outline what I just said. So the first thing is check if there's an image. And if there is, delete it from our Firebase Storage. The second thing is just going to be delete the post document from Firestore. Then the third thing is just going to be update Recoil state. Then at the end of all of these things successfully completing, we will return true. And if an error occurs, we want to return false. And so if it fails and it returns false, then the value of success over here will be false, and we will throw an error over here and be able to actually update our component to display that error to the user. Okay, so let's actually build this out. So the first thing is we want to check for the existence of an image URL on this post, because only posts with images are going to have an image URL. If there is a post image, we're going to create an image reference to that image inside of our storage. And we can do that with our ref function from Firebase, and we just have to pass this our storage instance from client app. And inside of here, we just need to specify the path to this image. And if you remember from when we actually uploaded the images, the path is going to be post.id/image. To actually delete this image from our storage, we can call a function called deleteObject, and this is going to be from, again, Firebase Storage, and then we can just pass it our image ref. Perfect, and that is all we need to do to delete it from our storage. All right, so next, let's delete the post from our Firestore database. So let's create a reference to the document that we're actually going to delete. So we can say post.docRef, and we can use our doc function from Firebase Firestore, and we can pass this our Firestore instance from client app. The collection that we are deleting from is posts, and the ID of the document that we're deleting is going to be post.id, just like this. Okay, so TypeScript is complaining here because the ID is an optional parameter on our post type, but because we know for sure that if we're deleting a post, this ID is going to exist, I'm just going to add the bang operator here to tell TypeScript that it is safe to proceed in using this value. All right, now to actually delete this document from our database, we can call the function deleteDoc from Firebase and pass it the document reference we're trying to delete. Perfect, so now let's just update our Recoil state. And we're going to use our setPostStateValue function up here. So we can call that down here and say setPostStateValue, take the previous value of state, spread it because we're only updating a single value, and that value is going to be posts. And the updated value of posts, we basically just want to remove this post that we're deleting from the current value of posts. So we can say prev.posts.filter, and filter is going to iterate through all of the items inside of posts, and the condition that we want to filter on is that item.id does not equal to post.id. Okay, so let's check to make sure that everything is in place. So if I go to my post item, we can see that we are calling this handleDelete function when I click on this delete button here. And that is going to call this, which is going to call onDeletePost, which is going to do all that stuff we just wrote. So theoretically, this should work. So let's give this a go. And we're going to add some loading state in a second here, but let's see. And let's go talk about what should actually happen on the back end when we do click on delete before we do it, so we know that it happens on both the front end and the back end. So if I go to storage and I go to posts, and I think it's going to be this one because it's second. Okay, so yeah, when we delete this post, this image should be deleted from our storage bucket here. So let's try doing this. So let's delete. Okay, so it worked on the front end, and we're saying that post was successfully deleted, but let's go check out our storage. Okay, so let's try refreshing here. So let's go into posts. Okay, yeah, so it was deleted, which is perfect. The only one that's in here now is that other post. Okay, so it did work. Let's go to our database and get into posts. And I don't even remember. I think it had to do with Photoshop. Yeah, okay, so it was deleted. Perfect. So we can actually delete posts now, which is super cool. Okay, and let's quickly add some loading state for our deleting so that we can actually indicate to the user that the deletion is in progress. So I'm going to create a state variable called loading delete, set loading delete. It's equal to use state, and we're going to initialize this as false. Then at the very top of our handleDelete function here, I'm going to set it equal to true. And then at the very bottom, I'm just going to set it to false. Set loading false. Once everything has successfully returned. Now all we need to do to actually update the UI with our loading state is we can come down here and we can toggle the display of this icon and this delete text here, this sort of garbage can text over here. All right, so let's just cut these out for a second. And let's create a ternary operator that is going to see if loading delete is true. If it is, we're going to show a spinner. And if it is not, we're going to show the icon and text. Let's say delete with the garbage can. I'm just going to wrap these in a fragment here, just like this. Okay, inside of here, we're going to use our spinner component from Chakra UI React, and we're going to make the size of this equal to small. Awesome, so if I just make this true, so we can see what this looks like, that is what that looks like. So super clean. It only appears inside of that button there. So let's see what this looks like when we actually delete something. So I'm going to say loading delete. All right, now let's delete this post and see what happens. Beautiful. I love spinners and skeletons, and loading state is just nice. All right, the very last thing I'm going to add is just displaying an error message if the deletion fails. So I'm just going to create a new post quickly. I'm going to call it here is a post, here is a post body. Let's post this. Okay. So let's go back to our new post form, and I'm just going to grab the exact same UI component using the Chakra UI alert. Let's go back to here, and I'm going to paste this inside of this column flex container here. So just right in here, save that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we just have to change this text in here to be our error state variable, just like that. And then change this from true to error. Okay, awesome. So now if our post fails to delete for any reason inside of here, then we will return false to our handleDelete function, and then the error will be set, and we will see that there was an error deleting the post. Awesome. And that is it for deleting posts. All right, you guys. So the next thing we're going to work on is the About Community component that is going to go on the right-hand side here. And that'll be sort of the last thing we need to do to wrap up the community page. So if we go back to the demo and just have a quick look at this component, if I go into a community here, this is the About Community component here, and it's responsible for actually rendering the data of the current community that we're in. We can see that it's going to appear on 3 of our pages. The first one is the actual home of the community page, r/baking. The second one would be in our submit page, baking/submit. And the third one would be in a single page view. If I actually click on this post here, it is appearing in here as well in this r/baking/comment/post ID. And we've seen this before, right? When we need data across multiple pages or multiple components that live far away from each other in the React component tree, we can do that by putting our data into our global Recoil state so that we can access it from anywhere. So as of right now, if we just look at the home community page, the community index page, we only have access to this community data in this page only. We currently do not have access to it in our submit page. And we also don't have access to it in the single page view because we have not even created this page. Basically, right now, we only have access to it in this homepage of the community. And so what we're going to do is take this community data and just throw it into our Recoil state in our communities atom. And then all we have to do is drop this component into the right-hand side fragment on all 3 of these pages, pass it the community data from our Recoil state, and then it will just have everything it needs to render successfully. And if this isn't super clear right now, just wait until we get into it and it should become more clear. So I want to start off by going back to our communities atom file here. And if you remember, this was a while ago, but if you remember, I created a comment here that was called visited communities. And I'm actually going to change this to a key called currentCommunity. And this is going to represent the current community that we are in. So if I click on baking, baking is going to be stored here. If I click on Tesla, Tesla is going to be stored here. And that way, when we want to access that data from any one of those 3 pages that I just mentioned, we can just grab it from our community state .currentCommunity. Okay, so as I just mentioned, the value that is going to go in here is going to be an actual community. So the type of it, we can use our community interface. And I'm going to make this optional because the user is not always in a community, so it doesn't necessarily have to be defined. So let's trace back to the actual index page of this community and look again at how we actually fetch that data. So if you remember, we are server-side rendering this page with getServerSide props, and on the Next.js server, we fetch the data for the community and we pass that as a prop to this component as this community data variable up here. And that is what we have been using in our header and our post, etc. But as we were just discussing, we do not have access to this community data on those other 2 pages that we need it. So all we're going to do is just take this prop community data and throw it into the current community value inside of our communities atom. And we want to do that as soon as this component renders. And if you recall, whenever we want to do something after the component renders, we want to use our useEffect hook. So let's bring that in and create an empty callback function here. Okay, so inside of this useEffect, we just want to do one thing. We just want to take this community data and throw it into our current community inside of our community state value. And we can do that by bringing in our set community state value function using Recoil. So we can say const set community state value is equal to use set Recoil state and pass it our community state atom. Make sure all of those things import. Then down here inside of our useEffect, all we want to do is say set community state value. We want to spread the previous value because we're only updating a single value. The value that we're updating is going to be current community, and we want to populate current community with the community data. All right, so let's come back to our app here. And we definitely already know that we have access to community data on the homepage of our community. But let's go check our submit page and see if we have it there. So let's go to submit. And if this recoil setting worked, we should have access to this data over here. All we need to do is read that value, current community, from community state value. So I can just say community state value is equal to use recoil value, and again, pass it our community state atom, just like this. And let's just take a quick peek at the console log of the value here. No autocomplete, very nice. Okay, so this is the log here. It's from our submit page. If I just open this out, let me expand the console here. If I open this up, we can see that the current community has been populated with Shadi's group and all of that data. And so now we actually have access to the data required by the about community component. So we can just reuse this component across all of these pages and just pass it this data as a prop. All right, so now that we have solved the data problem surrounding this component, let's actually go build out the UI for it. Let's go back to our app over here and go to our Shadi's group page. And then I'm just going to go to the index page of our community. And that about component is just going to go right in here. All right, so let's go create the file for our about component. So inside of community, I'm going to create a new file called about.tsx. Use our snippet. And so the first prop that this component is going to take in is going to be the current community data. So we can call that community data, and it is going to be of type community. We can make sure that imports from our Atom file, save that, and then come down here and destructure it in the props, community data. Okay, so I'm just going to close my directory here and shrink my console a bit because it's a little large. And let's just change the text here to be about. And then inside of our index page, I'm just going to actually bring the real component in, about, just like that. And we can see that show up here on our right-hand side. So now we just have to pass in the required community data props. We can just copy the thing from post here because it's going to be the exact same. And in this case, we can pass the community data variable that we're getting from our server-side rendering function. But on the other pages, we're going to need to grab it from state. The other pages are not going to be calling get server-side props because that would result in making the same query multiple times. So if we just put this data in state once, then they can all share this data and only a single query has to be made. Now there is the case of when the user refreshes either the submit page or the single page post view page, meaning that they are not starting off on the homepage of the community. In those cases, we would have to go fetch the data and actually make this query from those pages, since this homepage is responsible for getting that data on the Next.js server and putting it in state for those other pages to use. But we will handle that case after. It just is a simple workaround. For now, we're just going to focus on the user flow of a user starting in the community page and then going to those other pages, which assumes that that community data is always going to be available by the time those users go to either the submit page or the single page post view page. But we will handle the refreshing of those other two pages in a bit. All right, so now that we're actually passing that data to our component, let's go back to that. Let's just take a quick look at the about component so that we can kind of see the overall layout of it. Okay, so essentially it has this overall parent container here, and then there is this header component in the top, and then this other content component in the bottom. So really there's only three main containers here. So let's come over here and let's model that out. So our first outer container is going to be a box component from Chakra, and I'm going to make the position of this sticky because when we scroll down the community page, we want this to actually stick to the top, just like that. We don't want it to go above the screen. And we can do that with sticky positioning. And then we can actually specify the sticky position of this component, and we're going to want it 14 pixels from the top. And then the blue header component that says about community is just going to be a flex box. And then the white background container is also going to be a flex box. So pretty much our entire component is just a box with two flex boxes in it. And of course, there will be other stuff inside of it, but this is the main structure. All right, so let's come back to our app so we can actually see what we're doing. And let's work on this header component. So we're going to give this a justify of space between and an align of center. We want our background color to be blue 400. We're going to make the text color white. We're going to give this a padding of 3, and we're going to give this a border radius of 4 pixels, 4 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels. And that is top left, top right, bottom left. So we can see something showing up over there. Okay, now inside of here, we're going to have the text that actually says about community. Okay, and as always, text does not like to auto-import from Chakra, so let's do that ourselves. And we're going to shrink this a little bit, so let's make the font size equal to 10 point, just like that. And let's make the font weight equal to 700. All right, and then we're going to have an icon here. And I'm just going to paste in the icon import that we're going to use for this. So this is it here, the high outline dot circle thing. And then I'm just going to add that to our icon down here by saying as, and it's going to be equal to high outline dots horizontal. All right, there we go. So those are those 3 dots over there. Okay, and that is it for this header component here. Let's work on the actual body. So this flex container is going to have a direction of column, and we're going to give it a padding of 3, a background of white, and lastly, we're going to give it a border radius that is the complete opposite of the header component. So it's going to be 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 4 pixels, 4 pixels, just like that. Inside of this flex box, we're going to have a stack component here, and the stack is just going to handle the spacing between this component here with the members and the number of online, as well as this thing down here with the created at date and this create post button. Let's come back to our app here. All right, so inside of our stack, the first component is going to be a flex container, which is going to represent the container of the number of members and the number of online people. And we're going to give that a width of 100%, a padding of 2, and a font size of 10 point. Then inside of here, we're going to have a flex container for each of those 2 metrics. And we're going to give both of them a direction of column as well as a flex grow of 1, so that they take up exactly half of the width each. And this will become more clear when the visuals start showing up on the screen here. So in the first one, we are going to display the text, and that text is going to have the community data dot number of members. Okay, and on this number, we want to call a JavaScript function called toLocal or locale. I'm honestly not sure how the best way to say that. And that is basically just going to convert it to a nice number with commas in it and stuff. If we do not have that toLocal string function, it's just going to be this ginormous number without the nice comma formatting. So make sure you call that so that when your community has millions of members in it, it looks very good. Okay, and then right underneath here, we're going to have another piece of text that says members. Just like that, so 3 members. I'm just gonna go back up here to the first flex container inside of the stack and make the font weight a little bit heavier, and I'm just going to make it 700. There we go, that looks a lot better. All right, so in the second flex container here, we are going to have 2 pieces of text. So the first piece of text is going to be the actual number of people online, and we're not building this feature because it's not super critical. So I'm just going to hard code this to 1, and the text below it is just going to say online. Okay, so we are done with this first flex child of our stack container here. So underneath that, but still inside of our stack, we're going to add a divider component from Chakra. That's just going to be that nice gray line. And then underneath here, we're going to have another flex box for the created@date and the create post button. All right, so on this flex container, we are going to vertically align everything by making the align equal to center. We're going to give this a width of 100%. Padding of 1, font weight of 500, and a font size of 10 point. Okay, then inside of here, we're going to have the birthday cake icon to represent when this community was actually born. So we're going to bring in an icon. So I'm going to copy that import in over here, paste it under the other one, React icon /RI. Then I'm going to add that to this icon here as RI Cake Lake. All right, so let's make this icon a little bit bigger. And I'm going to give it a font size of 18, and I'm going to make the margin right 2. Now, right next to the icon, we want to have some text, and this is going to be the text that actually says when this thing was created at. So we're going to have the text created, and in order to format the date nicely, we can use the same moment library that we use for our post here, but we're going to use a slightly different function. We need some JavaScript, so I'm going to wrap this in curly brackets, and I'm going to call in moment from moment, so make sure that imports. And as you recall, we need to pass this a date, and the date that we're going to pass is going to be communityData.createdAt. We're going to do the exact same thing we did with the other timestamp. We're going to grab the seconds from here, multiply it by 1,000, and this is complaining, saying that createdAt might be undefined. So what we're going to do is just prevent this text from being shown at all if there is no communityData.createdAt. So we can say communityData.createdAt and this text. So now TypeScript is going to be happy because it knows that if we get to this point over here, it is going to be defined, so we can actually get rid of this optional chaining here. And we need to call a function on this moment date here. So at the end of it, we can call the .format function, and the format we want is going to be month, space, day, comma, year, 4 of those, just like that. And that is what that looks like. I love this moment library. It's so customizable, and it just formats it for you exactly however you want. It's pretty cool. Thank you, Moment, for helping us get closer to the Reddit appearance. All right, now underneath this Flex container, but still in our stack, we're going to create our create post button. And this is actually going to be a link from Next Link that is going to route us to the submit page of this community. And the link component from Next allows us to perform client-side routing by clicking on a certain component. So whatever we put inside of this link is going to route us to the page that we specify. And the element that we want to click on to take us to the submit page is going to be a button. Let's import that from Chakra. And the button is going to say create post. And we're going to give this a margin top of 3 and a height of 30 pixels. And the reason this is unhappy is because we are not passing it the href prop, and the href prop represents the actual client-side route that we want this thing to take us to. We want it to take us to /r/, and then we're going to need to grab the community ID from the router, which in this case is Shaddy's group, but we don't have the router in this file yet. So let's come up to the top of our component and bring that in with the useRouter hook. So we can say const router is equal to useRouter. Then down here in our link, we can access that. We can say router.query.communityID. Then we want to go to this community's submit page at /submit. Just like this. So now if I click on this create post button, it takes me to the submit page for Shaddy's group. How cool is that? Okay, and now what we're going to do is add the functionality to update the community image if you are the moderator/creator of this community. So if we go to our demo and I just go into a community that I created and I'm moderating, so Shaddy's community, I can see that I have this little admin section here and I can change the image, and then that will actually show in the community icon up here. So that is what we're going to do now. The process for doing this is going to be pretty much identical to what we saw in the new post form when we were uploading an image using this onSelectImage function and using the file reader. It's going to be pretty much the exact same. So what I'm going to do is actually create a custom hook and extract that logic into it. And it's only going to be about a 30-line hook. It's pretty small, and then we can just reuse it in both of these components here. So it's going to be a lot cleaner just so we don't have to rewrite the same functions. All right, so inside of our directory here, inside of hooks, I'm going to create a new file called useSelectFile.tsx, use our snippet, get rid of the props, as well as the return type. Okay, and inside of here, this is where we're actually going to have that onSelectImage function, and we're going to manage the selected file state from within here. So let's go back to our new post form. I'm just going to close my directory as well, and I'm going to actually copy this image over into this hook here, just like this, and I'm also going to grab that state selected file. So let's put this at the top of our hook. Okay, let's make sure we import useState from React. And then at the bottom here, we're going to return an object, and that object is going to contain our selected file, our set selected file, as well as that function onSelectImage. And actually, I'm just going to rename this to onSelectFile to sort of match the name of our hook here. And that is it for our hook. Now we can reuse this function and state in both of these components for our image uploading. All right, so let's go back to our new post form and just refactor this to use that hook. And it's very, very simple to do that. So we can get rid of this selected file state here, and we can get rid of this onSelectImage function here. I'll just leave it commented out for now. I'll delete it once we actually have the hook implemented. Then just underneath this commented out state here, I'm going to call that hook by saying const is equal to useSelectFile. Then what I'm going to grab is selected file, set selected file, as well as onSelectFile. So those three things that we were returning from our hook. Then down here, all we need to do is just change the name of this. So I'm going to say onSelectImage is going to be named onSelectFile. Inside of image upload, it will still be called onSelectImage, but we're passing it the onSelectFile function from our hook as that value. Now we're done. That is all we have to do to refactor this component to use this custom hook. So now I can just delete this onSelectImage function here, delete this state, where is it? Yeah, right here, delete that. And now our hook is going to handle all of that logic for us. And we can test this out by actually creating a post. So let's do this. Let's create a new post called testing hook, testing out the hook we made, and let's upload an image. Let's make it that classic demo image. So we can see that the state is still functioning as we expect. Back to the post, if I post it, awesome. So it functions exactly the same, but the logic has now been extracted into this useSelectFile hook, and we can reuse this exact same hook when we're doing our image uploading for our About Community thing over here. So very clean, reusable code. Okay, so we can close the new post form because we are done with that. We don't need it, and we can start implementing this in our About component here. All right, so let's actually create the UI so the user can input an image here. So underneath the create post link, but still within our stack, we're going to create a new section here, but we only want to display the section to moderators of this community. And in order to do that, we need to check if the current user's ID matches the ID of the creator of this community. So we're going to need to grab the user from our useAuthState hook. So we can say const user is equal to useAuthState, pass it our auth object from client app. And down here, the condition we want to check here is that user.uid is equal to the communityData.creator ID. If that is the case, we want to show some sort of fragment with admin options here. So inside of this fragment, I'm going to start off with having a divider from Chakra. Okay, then underneath the divider, I'm going to create another stack. And the stack is going to have a spacing of 1, as well as a font size of just 10 point here. Inside of the stack, we are going to have the text that actually says admin, and we're going to make the font weight of this 600. Underneath the admin text, we're going to create another flex container, which is going to actually have the upload image button, and this is going to have an align of center and a justify of space between. All right, inside of this flex container, we're going to have text, and the text is going to say change image. This is going to be the thing that the user actually clicks on to upload an image. It's similar to the upload button from our new post form. And if you remember from our new post form, this thing has to actually implicitly, sort of behind the scenes, click on an actual file input that we're going to create in a second in order to prompt the user to upload an image from their computer. So we're going to need to create another ref up here, similarly to what we did with the new post form. So I'm going to create a ref called const selected file ref, and this is going to be equal to useRef. And again, it's going to be of type string, and it's going to be initialized as null. All right, and we're going to attach this to an actual file input in just a second. But for now, what we can do is change the appearance of this text. So this text is going to have a color of blue 500. This is going to be cursor pointer. Okay, and on hover, we want to make the text decoration underline. Awesome, so this kind of looks like that. And then our on click, this is where we're actually going to click on that selected file ref. I'm just going to leave it blank for now until we create that input and attach the ref to it. And this is going to be the exact same thing we saw already. Under this text, we are going to check for the existence of a community image. If it exists, we will display it. If it does not, we will just display the classic Reddit icon there sort of as a default. But the community image can exist in two ways. It can either be inside the communityData.image URL, or if the user is adding a new file, there is going to be an image inside of our selected file state, which we're going to bring in from our hook. So let's do that right now. So at the top of our about component, let's call the hook useSelectFile. And from in here, we can grab selected file, set selected file, as well as on select file. Perfect. So now down here, this is defined. And then if this is the case, if we have either of these two things, we actually want to show an image from Chakra. So inside of our source of this image, we want to show one of these two things. And I'm going to add the statement, we want to show the selected file or communityData.image URL. And this is basically going to first check for the existence of a selected file. If it does not exist, it will show the community image URL. The reason I'm putting the selected file first is because the selected file sort of takes priority over a potential existing image URL because they're updating it, right? They want to see a preview of the updated image that they're uploading. So that is why we are checking for the existence of this first. And if it does not exist, it will go and render this. Okay, and we're just going to apply a few minor styling to this image. So we're going to say border radius is going to be equal to full, and our box size is going to be equal to 40 pixels. Okay, and then we're going to give this a alt of community image. And this is not happy because we do not have anything for the falseness of our ternary operator. And if we do not have either of those two things, what we want to display is our classic Reddit icon. So I'm just going to paste that over from my completed project just like this. And we're going to need to import this icon as well, FA Reddit. And that is coming from React Icons FA. Let's throw that up here with the other icons. So now if I save this, we can see that we have no image for the community yet. So it's just displaying this icon. But if I click on an image to upload it, oh, I haven't created the file input yet. So let's do that now. That's pretty critical. So underneath this flex container here, but still inside of our stack, we're going to add another condition to check for the existence of a selected file. And if there is a selected file, meaning that the user is attempting to upload a new image, we want to show the text save changes. So it's like, okay, you've selected a file you want to upload for this community image. Click on this to save these changes and actually upload this file. And I'm actually going to quickly add some loading state for the uploading so we can see that the uploading is in progress. And I'm going to come up here and create a new state variable called uploading image, set uploading image. And this is going to be equal to useState and initialize it as false. Then down here, I'm going to cut this out for just a second. And I'm going to actually add a ternary operator inside of here that's going to check if the image is in progress of uploading. So if it is, we want to display a spinner. Okay, and if it is not, we want to display that text, just like this. And when we actually upload an image, we will see what this looks like. And then on this text, we are going to give it a cursor of pointer, and then we're just going to add an onClick to the save changes text, which is going to call a function that is going to actually go upload this image to our Firebase storage and update our community document with that image URL. So we can actually create just the definition of that right now. So just coming to the top here, just going to create a function called onUpdateImage, and we're going to make this an asynchronous function and just leave it empty for now. But then we can add that to the onClick of this save changes text here. onUpdateImage. Perfect. Now the only missing piece is that file input, and I'm just going to paste that over because it's the exact same as the other one. Just throw it under here. and just change this to onSelectFile. Okay, and this is complaining, oh, I think I put the wrong type on this here. Okay, yeah, so this is supposed to be HTML input element. My apologies. The string type was for the selected file state itself. Make sure that the selected file ref is a ref of type HTML input element. My apologies for that. And then we can just pass it a initial value of null, and that should satisfy that ref TypeScript error down here. Okay, perfect. Now all we have to do is write this onUpdateImage function. So let's come back up here and start writing this out. So this function is going to be very similar and actually a lot simpler than our handleCreatePost function. All we have to do is take this file, upload it to our storage, and then update our community doc. And then we just have to update our Recoil state to use that new image URL so that the front end actually updates with that new image. So let's create a try catch block here. At the very top here, I'm just going to add a guard that says if there is no selected file, let's just return so that we don't try to do anything or upload anything if there is not a file to upload. Then in our log here, let's just log on update image error and log the error. And then also under here, I'm just going to set uploading image to be true. So the first thing we're going to do is take the file that the user is trying to upload and upload it to our storage bucket. So we can create an image ref, and we can use our ref function from Firebase Storage, and we can pass this our storage instance from client app, and the path to this image inside of our storage, we are going to store it at communities/communitydata.id/image. So pretty much the exact same path as the post image, just for communities now. All right, now to actually upload this thing to our storage, we can use the same function upload string from Firebase Storage, pass it our image ref, pass the file that we're actually going to upload inside of this image ref, and then also the format of the file, which is going to be data URL. And as a reminder, this is coming from the format we told our file reader to format this image in. After it's successfully uploaded, we can get the download URL for that image. So download URL is equal to await get download URL, and this is a function from Firebase Storage, and then pass it our image ref. Now all we need to do is update our community document in Firestore. So we can say await update doc. The first argument is going to be our document reference to our community doc. So we're going to say doc, pass it our Firestore instance from client app. The collection we're interested in is communities, and the ID of the document we are updating is communitydata.id. And as a second argument to our update doc function, we pass it an object with the updates we want to make to this document. And in this case, we want to update our image URL on our community document to be download URL, just like this. Now we just need to update our Recoil state to actually show this new image on our front end. And so in order to update our community state value, we're going to need to bring our set community state value function in from Recoil. So we can come up here and grab that from Recoil, saying set community state value is equal to use set Recoil state, pass it our community's atom from our atom file. Then down here, after all of this successful uploading, we can call set community state value, take the previous value of state, spread it. Okay, and now we want to update the image URL of our current community state. So the field we're updating on our community state is going to be current community, and we want to change the image URL of our current community. So we can spread the previous value of current community because we're only changing a single field on current community, and that field is image URL, and we want to update this to be download URL, just like this. And to satisfy the currently freaking out TypeScript, I'm going to typecast this updated current community object to be a community. One last thing we're missing is just the set uploading image to false at the very bottom here. All right, so let's give this a go and see what happens. So if I go to our Firebase Storage, we should, after uploading an image, see a new folder in here called Communities, and then we can go in there and we should be able to see the new image. And also in our Firestore Database, if I go to that community document for Shaddy's community, we should see, actually it was Shaddy's group, I think it was called, we should see a new field on here called image URL. So let's give this a go and see what happens. So I'm going to change the image. Okay, it's not even opening the thing, which is not good. Oh, I think I forgot to add, okay, yeah, so I forgot to add the on-click for this change image text to actually click on that input, which is pretty important. So let's make this callback actually click on this thing. So we can say selected file ref dot current dot click, just like this. Okay, now this should work. So let's click on this and just choose this Google logo because it's nice and round. You can see it show up here. So now we actually have a selected file in state. So it's showing the save changes text here. And now when I click on save changes, we can see the loading state happens. And now we should have uploaded that to our storage. So let's go find out. And we're going to make the change in a second to actually make this update here. But let's go see if the image first successfully uploaded. Okay, yeah, so Shaddy's group now has an image URL, which is perfect. And if I go to storage, the image should be there because the successful storage upload is sort of a prerequisite for that image URL. Yeah, so Shaddy's group, image, and you can see that it is the Google logo there. Perfect, super cool. So now let's figure out how to actually get it to display in here. And actually, if I refresh this page, it should show up in the header there. Let's see. Okay, so it's not, but let's go fix this. So inside of our header, so what we're going to do inside of here is instead of using the community data's image URL, we are going to use our community state value dot current community dot image URL. And the reason there is no image is because there is no source on this image. So the source of this is going to be that exact thing. Community state value, no autocomplete, very nice, dot current community dot image URL. So now we can see we have this ginormous image here. So I'm just going to add some additional stylings to make that better. And I'm just going to copy over the stylings from my completed project. Feel free to do that as well. So this is going to look like this. And that is going to actually control the size of that image and make it appear really nice like this. And the reason we're using the image URL from our current community state and not from community data is because in our about component, inside of our onUpdateImage function, we are updating our current community state with the latest image URL. So the community data variable inside of our header is not going to have that updated image unless we refresh the page and it's getting it from the database. But to show the updates without refreshing, we would have to use the latest value, which is going to be stored in our community state value dot current community. So now let's try this again. If I change the image and I change it to this thing of me, because that's the only other image I have, if I save changes, we should see this update immediately without having to refresh the page once it's done uploading. So if I save changes, perfect. And without refreshing, the image updates inside of our header. That is super cool. And now we can actually change the image of our community if we are the moderator. So technically inside of our header component here, you could remove the community data altogether and just simply access community state value dot current community because they are pretty much the same thing, because on our index page of our community, we took that data and we stored it in current community state. However, the component renders slightly faster when we use community data because that data is coming directly from the server and it is rendered on the server, rather than having to wait for the state to be populated by that community data on the client side, which actually happens completely after the component mounts because we put it in a use effect, causing a bit of a delay, because the component actually has to re-render once the state has been updated, which causes this sort of glitch on the UI. For the case of the image though, if we want that functionality for this header image to update without having to refresh the page, then we do have to use the community state value.current community to make it dynamic, because we actually update that state on our client side when we change the community image. But for the other fields, I'm just going to leave it as community data. But I just wanted to touch on that in case you were wondering. Okay, and one other thing that I noticed that I want to change is inside of our about component here, I realize that I'm using router.query.communityID, and I honestly have no idea why I did that because we have access to that same exact thing on communitydata.id. So we do not actually need the router at all. Some of you probably noticed that, so my apologies for that. We do not actually need the router in this file, so we can just get rid of it completely, and this create post thing will do the exact same thing. So we are completely done with this about community component, and we're going to move on to the voting functionality. And I think the voting functionality was probably the most fun feature to build in this app because it contains some really interesting logic, and I'm pretty excited to build it here and show you guys how to do it. Okay, so in our usePost hook, if you remember from a while ago, we actually defined this function on vote, but it is currently empty, and now we are going to write this thing out and get into the nitty-gritty of the voting functionality. All right, so before we get into actually writing the code, I just want to briefly touch on how we are going to be modeling the data for our voting functionality. So we're going to do something kind of along the lines of what we did for the community snippets, because if you look back at the community snippets, we had this sub-collection on the user, so we knew what communities the user was in. And then on the community documents, we had this field called number of members. And so when a user would join a community, we would add a document to the user's community snippet sub-collection, and then we would go also update the number of members of the community. We're going to do something similar here because if you look at our posts, we have a field on the post called vote status, which needs to be updated every time a user votes on this particular post. And on our users, we are going to create another sub-collection called postVotes. And the postVotes sub-collection is going to allow us to know which posts the user has voted on and in which communities. And then we can add documents, remove documents, or edit documents in this collection depending on what the user is doing and how they're voting. And then all we need to do is just go and actually update the associated post with the new vote status depending on what vote the user has placed. So we're going to be dealing with batch writes again because we're going to be updating two documents, postVotes as well as the post, and we only want both of these things to succeed or none of them at all. So we're going to be using a batch write for this logic. Okay, so let's talk about this onVote function now. So I'm going to come over to our demo and just go to the home page here. And when a user tries to vote on a post, there are three really important things that we need to think about. The first thing is, well, what is the value of this vote? Is it an upvote or a downvote? Probably important to know. The second thing is, has this user voted on this post before? And the third thing, and this sort of ties into the second, is if this user has voted on this post before, are they changing their vote to be the opposite, or are they removing their vote altogether? All right, so this post, for example, I have not voted on this post, so I can upvote it or I can downvote it. So let's upvote it. Okay, and now if I want to vote on this post, well, I have voted on this post already, so there are really only two options here. I can remove my existing vote, or I can change my vote from an upvote to a downvote. And so this type of logic is important when we're writing out our function because it dictates how we change this value. You can see that if I go from an upvote to a downvote, it changes by 2. And if I go from a downvote to an upvote, it increases by 2. And if I remove an existing upvote, it goes down by 1. And if I remove an existing downvote, it goes up by 1. So this is the logic that's sort of going to drive the structure of this onVote function over here. Okay, so for now, this function is going to take in 3 important arguments. The first one is going to be the post that the user is trying to vote on. That is going to be of type post. The second one is going to be the actual vote value, which is going to be a number. And the third one is going to be the community ID in which this post is in. That is going to be a string. So we can write out this logic with just a few simple if-else statements. So we can say, if this is a new vote, do something. Otherwise, do something else. And this else statement represents an existing vote, meaning that they have voted on the post before, and they're making a modification to that vote. And sorry, ignore this undefined error. I'm just trying to explain the concept here. But inside of this else statement, there are 2 things that can happen. The first thing is the user could be removing their vote, and this would just basically be like going from an upvote to neutral or down to neutral. That is what I mean by removing the vote. The second thing that can happen, though, is that they are flipping their vote. And this would look like going from up to down or down to up. And both of these scenarios can be handled by another if-else statement. So we can say, if removing vote, then do something. Otherwise, they must be flipping their vote, so do this other thing. So in the case of a new vote, the first thing we want to do is either add or subtract 1 to or from the post.vote status. That is going to be the first thing in our batch write. The second part of our batch is going to be creating a new postVote document on the user's postVote subcollection. So in the case of removing an existing vote, we are again going to be adding or subtracting 1 from the post.vote status. Whether or not we're adding or subtracting depends on the voting direction that we are moving in. The second thing in the batch is going to be deleting the postVote document. And in the case of flipping a vote, we are again going to be adding and subtracting from the vote status, but in this case, it is going to be 2 because we're flipping it, so we need to add or subtract 2. And this is the part that tripped me up the most when I was working on this logic here. It's kind of weird at first, at least for me it was. The second thing in the batch is going to be updating the existing postVote document in the database. So this is a high-level overview of this function, and I just wanted to spend a few minutes to walk through this because I think that will help when we're actually writing out the code rather than just diving right into it and being like, oh yeah, here, this is how it works. I think this is much better for you to grasp. So if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but that is my assumption. So now we can actually start working on writing out the code. All right, you guys, so the first thing we need to do is go back to our post state atom and actually create a spot where we can store all of the post votes from the database. So if we go back to our post atom file here, you may have remembered that I briefly mentioned the post vote section here on our post state, and so now we're actually going to implement that here. Okay, so we can re-enable this, and I'm actually going to create a TypeScript type for our post votes. So we're going to need this in other files, so I'm going to write export, and I'm going to say type post vote. And on our post vote, we're going to have an ID of type string. We're going to have a post ID, which is going to be the ID of the post that this vote belongs to. And we're also going to have the community ID of the community that this post is in. And then, of course, we need the value of the vote. So I'm going to create a new parameter called vote value, and this is going to be a number. And it's going to be a 1 for a vote and a -1 for a downvote. Okay, then down here on our post state, we can declare this as an array of post votes, just like this. And then on our default state, we can just initialize post votes as an empty array. And now TypeScript is all happy and we are set up and we have a place to store our post votes so that we can actually use them. So let's go back to our use post hook and start working on this function. Okay, so inside of this function, I'm going to create a try catch block as usual, and I'm going to move all of this logic inside of our try block because it's all of the stuff that we want to attempt to do. And then I'm going to fix this spacing here. And then if there is an error, we will log the error. So we will say on vote error and then log the error. So we are going to protect our voting feature against users who are not authenticated. So at the very top of our function, we're going to check for a user. And if there is not an authenticated user, we are going to open the authentication modal, but we will add that at the very end because it's very simple. So at the very top of our try block, we're going to destructure the vote status from our post that we're voting on. So I'm going to grab the vote status key here, just like this, because we're going to use it throughout all of this logic. So the way we can tell if the user has voted on this post before or not is we can search through the user post votes array in our post atom state here that we just added and see if there's a vote with the post ID that matches this post. If there is not an existing vote, we are in the case of a new vote. If there is an existing vote, then we are in the case of the existing vote. Okay, so let's actually create this. So we can say const existing vote. And this is going to be equal to post state value dot postvotes dot find. We want to search through this array for a specific vote. And the very next thing we're going to do after writing out this function is actually go and fetch those post votes from the database and populate this array with them. But for now, just assume that this array is populated with the user's post votes. And so we can iterate through every single vote and we can check, is there a vote with the post ID that is equal to this particular post's ID? And so the find function is either going to return to us the existing vote or it's going to return undefined. And then we can change this to if there is no existing vote, which is equivalent to saying that it is a new vote. Okay, and also above all of these if-else statements, I'm going to create our batch instance using our write_batch function from Firestore, pass it our Firestore instance from client app. The next variable I'm going to create is going to be a copy of the post argument. Just like this, I'm going to create an object and just spread the post inside of it. And I'll explain why I'm doing this in just a second here. Underneath here, I'm going to create updated post, which is going to be a copy of our post state value.posts array. And then finally, I'm going to create an updated post votes array, which is going to be a copy of post state value.postVotes. Okay, and so the reason we're creating these copies of these particular state variables is because these three things, posts, and post votes, are all going to need to be modified depending on what piece of the logic that we enter here. And so basically we create copies of the current value of state, modify these copies throughout these if-else statements, and then at the very end we can take those modified values and use them to update our state. And this creating copies of state and mutating the copies rather than the state itself is very common in React, and it ensures you avoid mutating state directly because we definitely don't want to do that because it can have unwanted side effects. And so this pattern of creating copies of state, modifying those copies and then updating state with that modified copy is a very common thing to do in React. And the last variable I'm going to create up here is going to be called vote change, and I'm going to initialize it to be the value of vote. And this vote change variable represents the amount that we are either going to add or subtract to our post document's vote status. And again, it's going to be modified throughout this logic here depending on what is triggered within the logic. And then at the very end, we will write that update to our post document in the database. So it starts off as the value of vote, and depending on what logic is triggered, it's going to be modified, and then we're going to apply that change at the very end. And if all of this is a massive blur and you're just like, what is going on? Don't worry, once we actually start writing this out, it will become a lot more clear. This function is probably the most difficult to wrap your head around in the entire build. Just give it some time, let it absorb, and it should make sense with time. All right, so let's start off with the case where there is no existing vote that is found, meaning that this is a new vote. So I'm just going to put that comment here. And the first thing we're going to do inside of this if statement is create a document reference to this new postVote doc that we're going to store in our database. So we can create a variable called postVoteRef. And this is going to be a document reference, so we can use our doc function from Firestore. And inside of here, we want to create a collection reference to the collection that this document is going to be in. And so we can pass this our Firestore instance. The collection that we're going to write this document into is going to be users. And now we just need to provide a path to this user's postVote subcollection. So we're going to need our user object from our useAuthState hook. So let's bring that in up here. We can say const user is equal to useAuthState, pass out our auth instance. Okay, now down here, this path is going to be user.uid / postVotes. So we are writing a document to the user's postVotes subcollection. So we can save that, and now we can actually create the new vote object that is going to be stored in this document as well as on our front end state. So we can call this new vote. This is going to be of type postVote, and the ID is going to be our postVoteRef.id. The post ID is going to be the clicked on posts ID, so post.id. And we can add the bang operator here to tell TypeScript that we know that this is going to be a defined value inside of this function. We can add the community ID, and then the vote value of this vote is going to be the vote argument passed to the function. So it's either going to be 1 or -1. And now we can add the document creation operation to our batch. So we can say batch.set, and the document we want to set is postVoteRef, and the data we want to store in that document is new vote. And if you recall, in order to make the batch actually perform these operations, we do need to call the function batch.commit, but we are actually going to call this at the very end of all of this logic, because depending on which if-else statements are triggered in here, the batch is going to contain different operations. So we're going to let it be modified throughout this logic, and then at the very end, we're going to commit all of the tasks that it has been assigned. Now let's actually update the post vote status. So we're going to modify this updated post object because if you remember, it's just a copy of post, and it's this updated post that we want to make the updates to. So we can say updated post dot vote status, and we want to update this value to be the current vote status, which we grabbed off of the post from up here. So this represents the current vote status, and we want to add the value of vote to it. So we're either going to be adding 1 or adding -1, depending on if we upvote or downvote. Okay, and we also want to add this new vote to our postVote state. So we can take our updated postVotes, and we basically want to append this new vote to it. So we can set this equal to an array, and inside of this array, we want to take all of the existing postVotes, so we can spread the value of itself, and then just add the new vote to the end of it. And make sure when you declare updated postVotes up here, that you use the let keyword here. I believe I initially had this as const, but you will get an error down here if you try to reassign it. If you use the const keyword here, make sure you do use let to allow you to reassign this variable here. Okay, and if it is a new vote, the value of vote change is just going to remain the value of vote, so either 1 or -1. We do not need to modify it inside of this if statement because we're going to use this vote change value in updating our post document in our database, which we're going to add to our batch operations at the very end of all of this if else statements. So we do need to make sure we're updating this accordingly. But in the case of a new vote, we do not need to modify it. It's just going to remain the value of vote. Okay, let's talk about the case of an existing vote. So in the case of an existing vote, whether we're removing or flipping the vote, we are going to be doing some sort of batch write involving the postVote document in our database. So we can still create a reference to that. So we can say postVote ref. However, this is going to be a reference to an already existing postVote document. Before, we were creating a reference to a newly created document that doesn't exist yet, whereas this one does exist. So we can pass this our Firestore instance. The collection that we're interested in is still users, and the path to this existing postVote document is going to be on the user.uid document / postVotes / existing vote.id. All right, let's handle the case of the user removing their existing vote. So we can tell if a user is removing their vote if the vote that they're trying to make matches the value of the already existing vote. Okay, so as an example, let me upvote this post here. So I just created a new post vote with a vote value of 1 because it was an upvote. So if I click on this upvote again and send a value of 1 to our function, that is going to be equal to the already existing vote value, which is 1. So that's how we can tell if a user is removing their vote. Okay, we can say if the existing vote.vote value is equal to the vote that they're trying to place, that means they're removing their existing vote. Okay, so now we want to add or subtract 1 to or from the postVote status. So let's do that. We can say updated post.vote status is equal to the current vote status. But this time we want to subtract vote because we want to go in the negative direction. So let me upvote this post. If I upvote it again, I do not want it to go to 210. I actually want it to go down to 208, right? So we want to go in the opposite direction. On the flip side, if I downvote it again, I do not want it to go to 206. I'm removing my downvote, so it actually should go back up to 208. So we're going in the negative direction. So that is why we are subtracting the value of vote here. And now we want to update our postVote state, but now we want to remove the existing vote from our postVotes. So we can set this equal to updated postVotes.filter. And our filter condition is going to be that the vote ID does not equal to the existing vote.id. So this is going to remove the existing vote from the postVotes array, and we're storing that filtered version inside of updated postVotes, which we're going to use later to update state. So now we want to delete the postVote document, so we can add that delete operation to our batch by saying batch.delete, and the document we want to delete is postVote ref. And also in the case of removing the vote, we want to negate the value of vote change here, so we're just going to multiply it. So we're going to say vote change times equals -1, and we're just going to negate it. And if you don't understand the complete purpose of this vote change variable yet, don't worry, it will make a lot more sense when we actually get down to writing the batch update for updating the post document's vote status. Now let's talk about the case of the user flipping their vote. In this case, we are going to be adding or subtracting 2 from the post vote status. So if I upvote this post here, if I flip my upvote to a downvote, it should not go back down to 208, it should go down to 207, so it's decreasing by 2. And on the flip side, if I go from a downvote to an upvote, it increases by 2. So to update our post vote status, we can take our updated post.vote status, and we want to update this to be the current vote status, and we want to add 2 times the value of the vote that the user is trying to make. So if I downvote this, vote is going to be -1, but I want to subtract 2 from 209. So I want to do 2 times -1, which is -2. So I want to do 209 minus 2, which is going to be 207. In the opposite direction, it would be 207 plus 2 times 1, so 209. I find this kind of confusing at first. I don't know about you, but yeah, I don't know. It was kind of weird to wrap my head around the first time I was doing it. Okay, and now we want to update our postVotes array, but this time we're not adding 1 like in the case of a new vote, and we're not removing 1 like in the case of removing the vote. We are editing 1. And so in order to edit 1, we need the index of this vote inside of the postVotes array. And JavaScript has a very handy array function called findIndex, where we can find the index of a particular item in an array, and then we can use that to update the value at that index. So I'm going to create a variable called voteIndex. So I want to call the function findIndex on the postVotes array. So I can say postStateValue.postVotes.findIndex. And this is going to iterate through all of the votes, and we want to find the one where the vote ID is equal to the existing vote ID. So we are finding the existing vote. So now we know the index at which this existing vote sits, inside of this postVotes array. So now we can actually update that value of postVotes array to be the updated vote. So we can say updated postVotes at vote index. And we want to set this equal to a new vote. And that new vote is going to be everything inside of existing vote, but with a updated vote value of the vote that the user is trying to place. And now all we have to do is add our postVote update operation to our batch rights. So we can say batch.update, and the document we want to update is postVoteRef, and the update we want to make is to the vote value field, and we want to update the value to be vote. Okay, so now at the end of all of these if-else statements, we want to actually update our post document in our database. So now we can create a reference to our post document so that we can add the update statement to our batch operations. So we can say postRef is equal to doc, pass it our Firestore instance. We want to access the post collection, and the ID of this document is post.id. And again, we can add the bang operator here to tell TypeScript that we know that this is going to be a valid value. And now we want to add the post update operation to our batch. So we can say batch.update. We want to update the postRef, and the update that we want to make is to the vote status field. And this is where that vote change value is going to come in. We want to update vote status to be the current value of vote status plus vote change. So the value of vote change is going to be different depending on which if-else statement we triggered in here. It could be -2, it could be +2, it could be 1, it could be -1. Depending on where we ended up in those statements, it was modified. And now at this point, we have all of the batch operations set up, so we can actually execute them by saying await batch.commit. And this is going to write those updates to our database. So now all we have to do is update our front-end Recoil state, and we're going to do that using these copies up here that we created, because the copies were modified and updated throughout all of this logic. And now we can take those values and actually store them in state, and our state will contain all of the updates necessary. So we can call our setPostStateValue function, take the previous value of state, and we're going to update a few values here. We're going to update our post array, and the updated value of this is going to be updated posts. And we also want to update our postVotes, and our updated value of this is going to be updated postVotes. Awesome. So now I hope the idea of making these copies and then modifying the copies and then using those copies to update state at the very end makes more sense now that we've kind of written out this logic. Okay, so this is completely fine and we are updating state, except we are missing one thing. This updated post array has not yet been updated to contain this newly updated post. So if you remember, we created this variable called updated post, which just represents the post that we're voting on. And depending on what type of vote the user placed, we updated that post's vote status, right? We added 1 to it, added 2 to it, subtracted 2 to it, whatever. We updated the vote status. But we did not take that newly updated post and store it inside of the updated post array. So updated post does not yet contain the newly updated and modified post with the new vote status. Okay, so in order to update the single post element inside of the updated post array, we are going to need access to that post index. Pretty much the exact same thing we had to do with our vote here. We needed the vote index to update that vote inside of postVotes. We need the post index so that we can update the value at that index. So we can find the post index very similarly to how we found the vote index above. We can say post index is going to be equal to postStateValue.posts.findIndex. Okay, and then we want to iterate through all of the post items and find the one where the ID is equal to the post that we're voting on's ID. So post.id, just like this. So now we can use this index to actually update our updated posts. So we can say updated posts at post index is going to be equal to updated post, just like that. And now updated post contains the post with the latest vote status value. So I think we are all done with the logic of our onVote function. The last thing we need to do is just go back to our post component. And if you remember, we had this prop that we defined here, user vote value, and we just temporarily passed it as undefined because we had not built the voting logic yet. So now we can actually make this the correct value. And also we're getting a TypeScript compiler error here for our onVote thing. I think we just have to fix the type declaration for our function, but we will do that in a second. Let's ignore that for now. Okay, so now that we actually have an existing postVotes array, we can basically search through that array and see if there is a vote with the post ID of this item that we're currently iterating through's ID. So that would look something like this. So we can say post state value dot postVotes dot find, so we can iterate through all of the votes and see if there's one with a post ID that matches this particular post item's ID. So then if the find function does end up finding a vote, we can grab that vote's vote value. And if it does not find it, then user vote value will just be undefined, and it will behave as if the user has not voted on the post, which is exactly what we want. Now we can just quickly fix this on vote compiler error. So I just have to go into our post item and change this to be the proper function declaration type. So if we just go to our use post, I'm just going to copy these argument types here and bring them over to our post item, paste them in there, and then this function is going to return void. Okay, now that should satisfy TypeScript over here. And what's going on in here? Okay, now we just have to change the actual way these onVote functions are being called. So I'm just going to change this to a callback function that calls onVote, and we need to pass it 3 arguments. And the first one is the actual post. The second one is the actual vote value. So for an upvote, it is going to be 1. And the third one is going to be the community ID, which is going to be post.communityID. Perfect. So we can just copy this and paste it on our downvote one here. But we want to change the value of our vote down here to be -1. Our onVote function, I think, is complete. We have successfully passed the user vote value to the post item component so that we can tell if we have voted on this post and what that value is. So I think we are ready to give this a go. So let me try this out and see what happens. So if I click on this, you can see that we are seeing those changes. And what happens if I flip my vote? Perfect. If I remove my vote, awesome. So it seems to be working. Let's go back to the back end and see what should be happening over there. So I'm going to come over here and split screen this with our app. Okay, so what we want to see is inside of users, if I vote on a post, I should see the postVotes subcollection appear. So I'm going to find the Shad Mary one here. So let's go back to our app. So if I vote on this, and then I just refresh this, on the first time when the collection is created, you have to refresh because the collection doesn't exist, but after that it is in real time. So yeah, you can see that there is a postVotes collection here, and it has the post ID of that post, it has the vote value, and then if I flip this vote, you can see that that is being updated. If I remove the vote, it's deleted. How cool is that? I think that's so cool. Awesome. Okay, and the other thing that should be changing is if I go look at the post, we should see the vote status has been updated. So that's the other thing that is in our batch right, remember? So if I downvote this, it updates to -1. Upvote goes back to 1. If I remove the vote, 0. Awesome. So our batch writes are working. We are able to actually vote on posts, and the vote status of the post document is updating as well. How cool is that? Let's put this back over here. All right, you guys, so the last thing we need to add here is just a quick function that is going to actually initialize the value of this postVotes array by going to the database and getting this user's postVotes for the current community. And I briefly mentioned before that we were going to do that because right now the postVotes is just an empty array. And so if I were to vote on a post, the array is populated, but then if I refresh this page, we can see that that vote is not going to be persisted because we do not go and get those user votes from the database. So the 1 persists because the post document was updated. But in terms of our postVotes, we have not retrieved them yet, so we actually can't see that we have indeed voted on this post. So to fix that, we just need to add a function that is going to be called as soon as we land on a community page to actually go and get all of our votes for the posts in this community. So it's pretty simple, and we are going to add that inside of our usePost hook here. So at the bottom, I'm going to create this function called getCommunityPostVotes, and it's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take in a community ID, which is of type string, and it is going to go and actually fetch all of this user's postVotes for the current community that they are currently in. Hence the name getCommunityPostVote, and this should be plural postVotes with an S. So we can just write a simple query for our postVotes collection and then store those documents inside of our postVotes array in our Recoil state. So let's write that out. So we can say const postVotes query is equal to query, so bring in the query function from Firestore. And the first argument is going to be the collection that we want to query, so we can pass in our collection function, which is going to take in our Firestore instance. The collection we are querying is users, and the path to the postVotes subcollection is going to be user.uid/postVotes. So the second argument to our query is going to be a where clause, because we only want to find the postVotes where the postVotes community ID matches the community ID that we're interested in. So in this case, Shadi's group. Whatever community we're in, we only want the postVotes for that community. So the field we're interested in on our postVote documents is community ID, and we want to check if the community ID is equal to this community ID that is being passed in as an argument, just like this. Okay, so now we can pass this query to our getDocs function to actually go and get this set of documents from our database. We can say postVote docs is equal to await getDocs, and we can pass in our postVotes query. Now this is going to return to us an array of Firestore documents, and we want to extract all of the data out of each of those documents. So we can create a new array called postVotes, and we can take our postVote docs and map through all of them. So we can say postVote docs.docs.map, and for each one of those documents, we want to return a new JavaScript object with the ID as well as the extracted data from that document, just like this. And now we can store this postVotes array in our Recoil postVote state. So we can say set post state value, take the previous value, spread it, and the only field we want to update here is postVotes. And the value in this case is going to be postVotes. And to satisfy the TypeScript compiler here, we can just typecast this to be an array of postVotes. So make sure that that type imports from our post.atom file. So that is it for this function here, but we have not yet called it. So we want to call this function as soon as the user lands on any given community page. And so to do that, we can create a useEffect, make sure that imports from React. And inside of our useEffect, we can call our getCommunityPostVotes function. And then we can pass in the community ID. So we can get the community ID from our community's atom inside of the current community. So if we come up to the top here of our hook, we can use our Recoil hook to grab the value of the current community. So I'm going to create a variable called currentCommunity, and I'm going to use the hook useRecoilValue, and I'm going to pass in the community's atom, community state atom, and then I want to access the current community, just like this. Now down here, I can pass this as an argument to that function. So I can say currentCommunity.id, just like this. Now TypeScript is complaining, and we're going to fix that by adding a guard above this function to prevent calling this function at all if there is no current community, because it doesn't make sense to get community postVotes if there is not a current community. So what we can do is add a dependency here of the current community. And so every time the current community changes, this is going to trigger, and we want to make sure there is a defined community before calling this function. So we can just add an if statement here to return out of this function if there is no current community.id. And that will make TypeScript happy down here. Now there is one more dependency we need to add here, because if we look at our community postVotes, it depends on a valid user ID as well. We do not want to call this function if the user has not been logged in or if the user has not yet been loaded from our auth service. So we can add a dependency here of user, and in our if statement here, we can add if there is no user or no community ID, return, and do not call this function because, well, this function is pretty useless without either of those two things. Okay, so now if I actually refresh this page, my postVotes are going to be fetched from the database as soon as this component loads, and then they are stored in the postVotes state so that I can see which post I have voted on refresh. So if I downvote this post and then I were to refresh, we should see that vote as soon as the page refreshes, which we do. Awesome. And so now every time we go into a different community, this useEffect is going to trigger because the value of current community is going to change to the new community. And it's going to go get the postVotes for that new community. So that is how this logic works. Cool. And just for fun, just so we can see more exciting values other than 1, -1, and 0, I'm going to go to this post here and just modify this to like 462 and come back here and save it so that we can actually see this value modify. So it's a little bit more exciting. So now if I downvote this, it goes down to 460. If I go back up, 462, and I remove the upvote, 461, downvote, remove the downvote. Very cool. The logic seems to be working. I love it. I think this voting functionality is super cool. It is another extremely important pillar of the Reddit functionality. Without voting, Reddit would not be Reddit. So we have successfully implemented voting functionality, and we have written out probably the most complicated function of this build. So congratulations for making it to here. I hope that I was able to explain that in the most clear way possible. If anything is unclear, please ask in the Discord. I would love to help you, or just comment down below. But I hope it makes sense. And now we can move on to other things. So now we can actually protect this feature against unauthenticated users by adding a simple check at the top here to see if they are logged in, and if they are not, we can open the modal. And this is exactly what we've done with other features like trying to join a community. It's the exact same thing. But there's another interesting thing related to this that we need to take care of. So watch what happens when I log out. So I logged out, but my votes are still there, and that doesn't really make sense. Our community snippets were cleared because it no longer knows that we're in this community because there is no user signed in, but our votes are still there. So we definitely want to clear those out of state when the user logs out. So the way we can do that is by just adding another simple use effect to listen to changes in our user object. So let's create that. So we can say use effect, and we can add a dependency here of user. So this is going to trigger every time the user object changes. And if on one of those changes there is no user, we want to clear the postVote state. So we can say set post state value, take the previous value, and we want to update this state to have empty postVotes. So we can set postVotes equal to an empty array, just like this. Okay, so you saw that they cleared there. So I'm just going to add a comment here for clarity, clear user postVotes. All right, so now what happens when we log back in? Let's see if it actually goes and fetches our postVotes for us. Okay, so it does not. It's weird, right? Because we have voted on these posts. It's not picking that up. It's not fetching them. It fetched our snippets because it knows we're joined into here, but it's not getting our votes. Okay, so it fetched our snippets because it knows that we're in this community, but it did not go and fetch our votes. And the reason that is because on this use effect here, we have a dependency of currentCommunity, but we are not getting to this getCommunityPostVotes function because we are not getting past this if statement. And the reason that is because if you remember, when we logged out, we reset our entire community state atom, meaning that currentCommunity is currently null. Therefore, there is no currentCommunity.id, so this if statement is protecting against running this function. So we just need to slightly refactor the logout flow here, because on logout, we only want to clear the community snippets. We don't really want to reset the entire community state atom. So if we go back to this user menu here, this is where we did that. On logout, we just called this reset community state function and completely cleared that atom. So I'm just going to comment this out here. And what we're going to do instead is go into our useCommunityData hook and basically do something similar to what we're doing with the postVotes here. We're going to add a use effect with a listener on our user, and then if there is no user, we're just going to clear these snippets only, not the entire community state itself. So let's go and do that. So inside of our useCommunityData hook, we already have a use effect that is listening to changes in the user. And then if there is indeed a valid user, it will go get the snippets for that user. So all we need to do is just refactor this if statement very slightly. So instead of returning, what I'm going to do is inside of this, if there is no user, we want to set our community state value to be the previous value, but with empty my snippets. Basically the exact same thing we're doing with our postVotes over here, clearing them out if there is no user. And then at the end of this, we can return just like this. So now when the user logs out, we are only clearing these snippets. We are not clearing the current community state. So then when we log back in, it will actually go get our postVotes. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to log out, and I'm just going to refresh to reset everything. So if I log back in, it should know that we have joined this community, and it also should pick up the votes on these posts here. So let's try this. So let's log in. Perfect, so it works. It went and got our snippets, and it also got our votes. Now let's see if when we log out, it clears those things. Perfect. So all we're doing in these use effects here is just clearing all of the user-specific data inside of our post state as well as our community state. So the postVotes as well as these snippets should be cleared when there is no user. Perfect. So I'm just going to go back to the user menu, delete this, and we actually do not need this reset community state value function. We can close our user menu, So now all we have to do is just add a simple check at the top here. If the user is attempting to vote on a post and they are not logged in, we want to prompt them to log in. So we can say if there is no user.uid, then we want to open the modal. And in order to do that, we are going to grab our setAuthModalState function from Recoil. So we can say setAuthModalState is equal to useSetRecoil and pass in our authModalState atom. So make sure that imports. And then inside of this if statement here, we just want to call that setAuthModalState function. And we want the state to be open, as well as the view to be log in. And then we can return because we do not want to proceed. So now if I try to vote on a post and I'm not logged in, it is going to ask me to log in. So now we can log in. And once I log in, it'll go and actually fetch that data for us, which is super cool. And then I can change my votes if I would like to. Awesome, guys. So we have successfully implemented the voting functionality into our app, and we have written out probably the most complicated function of this entire build. So congratulations for making it here. I really hope that I was able to explain all of that in the most clear way possible. But if anything is unclear, please do ask in the Discord. I would love to help you, or just leave a comment down below and I'll also answer that. But I do hope that it makes sense. And that was a long sprint we had to do to implement voting functionality. But we are done, and it is an essential part of Reddit. Without voting, Reddit would not be Reddit. So I am glad we have implemented it, and we can now move on to other things. All right, you guys. So the next thing we're going to work on is the single post page. So if we go to our demo here, we want to build the functionality so that we can click on posts like this, and then it takes us to a page that is specific to that post. And this is where we can see all of the comments on this post as well as comment ourselves. And if we look at the URL up here, it is at the route r/baking/comments/post ID. So this is the route we need to build, and that is what we are going to do now. So let's come back to our app here, and if we just take a quick look at our post atom, you may have remembered that we actually did define the state for the selected post. So selected post represents the single post that we are currently viewing. So when I click on a post, we are going to store that post inside of selected post. And then when we're on this page here, that is where we are going to read data from. And also in our usePost hook, we did define that function right here. It is currently empty. This is the function that is going to be called when we click on a post, and all it is going to do is just take that post and put it into that selected post state. It's a very simple 4 to 5 line function. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is actually create the page route for this page. So again, the route for this page is going to be r/communityID/comments/post ID. So inside of our community ID folder, we need to create another folder called comments. And inside of our comments folder, we can create our dynamic post ID route. So we can use our square brackets, and inside of here, we can put PID.TSX. Square brackets, because again, it is a dynamic route. The post ID can change depending on what we click on. Okay, then inside of here, we can use our snippet, and we can get rid of these props here. And I'm going to rename this component to be post page, just like this. And we're not going to have any props, so we can get rid of that. And that is good to go. And then we can just add the text post page here. So now if I go to this route here, if I just go to r/shadysgroup/comments/some random post ID, it could be anything, we should see this post page text here. And we do. Awesome. Now if we go back and look at the demo, we can see again that it has the same layout as every other page. So we can, again, use our page content layout component with our post and comments in the left-hand side and the about component in the right-hand side. Once again, the page content layout saves our lives, and we do not have to write any more styles. We can just drop components in, and it is easy peasy plug and play. Let's come back to our app here, and this is what we're going to do. We can get rid of this div, and we can return that page content layout component, make sure that imports from that file there. Then we can have our two left-hand side, right-hand side fragments here. Okay, and on the left, this is where we're going to have the selected post as well as the comments for that selected post. Okay, and then on the right-hand side, we're just going to have our about component. And our selected post is going to be a component we have already created, which is just post item. And we're just going to pass it the selected post as the post prop. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the post item for the selected post. So we can reuse our post item component like I was just mentioning. So make sure that imports. And if you remember from our posts component, which is the place that maps through all of the community posts and returns a post item, we pass this a bunch of functions that come from our usePost hook. So again, in this PID page, we are going to need to bring in those functions from our hook. So at the top here, we can call our hook. We can say usePosts, make sure all of this imports. And the values we're going to get from this hook are going to be postDateValue, set postDateValue, onDeletePost, as well as onVote. And we do not need the onSelectPost function in this page here because we don't really need to select a post if we are already in the single page view. So we are not going to pass the selectPost function to our post item component on this page like we were on the community page. So we do not need this from the hook. Now down here, we can start passing in some of these props. So the first thing we need to pass is a post, and that post is going to be our selected post from our post state. So we can say postDateValue, no autocomplete, dot selected post. And ignore these compiler errors for now. We are going to deal with that. Our second prop is going to be our onVote function. So onVote is equal to onVote. OnDelete, this is equal to onDeletePost. Save this so it reformats. Our user vote value is going to be the exact same. We can do our postDateValue dot postVotes dot find, and we want to iterate through all of these items and look for a vote with the post ID that matches the postDateValue dot selected post dot ID. Perfect. And then if there is one, we can grab the vote value, just like that. Okay, the user is creator. We are going to check if the user's ID matches the selected post creator ID. So we are going to need to bring our user in up here from our useAuthState hook. So const user is equal to useAuthState. Pass this our auth object from client app. Now our user is creator prop is going to be the Boolean that the user's ID is equal to the postDateValue dot selected post dot creator ID. That is how we will know if this user is the owner of this post. And TypeScript is currently complaining because the selected post is initialized as null. And to prevent this, we can wrap this component in the condition that we only want to show it if there is actually a valid, truthy selected post. So we can save this, and it's still complaining because onSelectPost is missing. Oh, okay. So we want to go to our post item, and we want to make the onSelectPost function an optional prop. Because again, this is only going to be passed to the post item on the community page, not in the single post page. And that should satisfy the TypeScript compiler on this page. Awesome, so now we have a happy component. We currently do not have a selected post because we have not done anything inside of our onSelectPost function. But when we do, it will show that post. So let's go do that now. Let's go to our usePost hook and actually work on this function. It's a very simple function. So this function is going to take in an argument, which is going to be the post we are clicking on and is going to be of type post. And all we want to do inside of here is take that post and put it into the selected post state. So we can say set postDateValue, and the only value we want to update in our state in this function is going to be selected post, and we want to set it equal to the passed in post. And when the user clicks on the post, we actually want to take them to that page, so we can use our router to do that. So we can bring in our router up top. So we can say const router is equal to useRouter from NextRouter. Then down here, inside of our onSelectPost function, we can use the router to direct the user to that path. So we can say router.push, and the route we want to take them to is /r/ then the community ID, which can be accessed on post.communityID, then /comments/post.id. And that is how we can take them to that route. And I think we added this to the onClick of the post item, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I'm just going to close some of these files here. If we go to our post item, I think we did add this to the onClick. Okay, yeah, we did. We're going to need to change this a bit, though, because we need to pass in some arguments. So what we're going to do is change this onClick to a callback that is going to call our onSelectPost. And as an argument, we just need to pass in that post. TypeScript is unhappy about two things here. So let's take a look at these. So the first one is it's saying that expected 0 arguments, but got 1. And that is because our type definition for our onSelectPost function in our props does not say that we are taking in an argument. So we can change that to be exactly like this. And we should be good down there for that first compiler error. The second compiler error is that it is saying that we cannot invoke an object which is possibly undefined. Just a few seconds ago, we made the onSelectPost function an optional prop. meaning that if it is not passed, the value for it is going to be undefined. And TypeScript is basically saying, well, this can be undefined sometimes, but you're trying to call an undefined instance, so that is not allowed. That's really bad. And the way we can fix this is to basically just add some simple logic here to make sure that it is passed as a prop and that it is a defined function before calling it. And we can do that similarly to how we do it with React components. We can say onSelectPost and onSelectPost. So on click, we are first going to check for a truthy valid value of onSelectPost. If it exists, then we will call this function here. And so now when I go back to the community page, Shadi's group, I should be able to click on a post and it take me to that post page. So if I click on this, it does indeed do that. So we are on this page. This is the ID of this particular post, and I can go back and I should be able to click on another one. Perfect. So it's functioning exactly how we want it. And now this post is inside of the selected post state here because our onSelectPost function did that. All right, the next thing we're going to do is apply some very slight modifications to the style of this component if we are indeed on the single post page. If you look at this demo here, if I click on this post, you can see that it's styled differently. We don't have the gray background over here. The border radiuses are slightly different. There is no mouse hover because it's not really clickable. So just very, very minor things that we have to go and modify inside of our post item component over here. So let's do that quickly. So inside of our post item, the way we can tell whether or not we are on the single post page versus the community page is if the onSelectPost prop is passed. Because remember that we are only passing the onSelectPost function as a prop to our post item component on the community page. We are not passing it on the PID page because we do not need to select the post any further than we have already selected it. So that is how we can tell inside of our post item if we are on the single post page or the community page. If this is defined, we are on the community page. If it is undefined, we are in the single post page. And that is how we are going to conditionally modify the styles of this component. All right, so applying this logic, we can create a new variable called single post page, which is going to be a Boolean that represents if we are on the single post page. So this is going to be true if onSelectPost is undefined. Okay, so if there is no select post, then it is true that we are on the single post page. So that is how we can detect which page we are on. And so the purpose of this variable is that we can use it inside of our styles here to just conditionally apply certain styles. And there's only about 4 or 5 things we have to change here, so it's pretty minor. The first thing is going to be our border color. So now we can get rid of this gray 300, and instead we're going to use a ternary operator to check the truthiness of our single post page variable. So we can say single post page. If this is true, we want the border color to be white. And if it is false, we want the border color to be gray 300. Perfect. The next thing is going to be our border radius. So if we are in the single post page view, then we want the border radius to be 4 pixels, 4 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels. And if we are not, we just want it to be 4 pixels. And as for our hover styling, we do not want to apply a border color if we are hovering in the single post page. So we can say single post page. If we are, we do not want the hover border color. If we are not, we do want it, and we want it to be gray 500. So now if I hover, we're not seeing that there. And we can do the exact same thing to our cursor. So for our cursor, we can say single post page. If that is true, we do not want a cursor, so we're going to use the keyword onSet. If it is false, we want pointer. Perfect. So now we do not have that cursor on this page. Now there are just 2 more things we have to change, and they're both on this voting container here. So for our background, if we are on the single post page, we want a background of none. And if we are not, we want a background of gray 100. Okay, now you saw that background disappear, which is perfect. And the very last thing is the border radius. So we can add the ternary operator once again. If it is true, we do not want a border radius. And if it is false, we want a border radius of 3 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 3 pixels. All right, and that is it for our styling modifications. Okay, so what we need to do now is make 2 very, very small tweaks to our onVote function, because currently it will not work on this page. If I try to vote on this post, the voting works. I'm able to actually place a vote, but you can see that the vote status of the post is not working. And so we do have to fix that. All we need to do inside of our onVote function is check for the existence of a selected post, because that means we are voting on the selected post from the single post page. And if there is a selected post, we just want to update it to be that updated post. It's very, very simple. It's a single if statement. Awesome. So what we can do is come down here and just underneath this first set post date value function, we can write an if statement to say if post date value dot selected post. If there is a selected post, we want to call our set post date value function and update our selected post to contain that latest vote status, which is going to be on the updated post object here. So we can spread the previous value and update selected post to be updated post, just like that. So now if I click on this, you can see that the vote status is indeed updating and our voting functionality does work. Okay, now there's one more thing we have to change in this function, and I'm going to show you what it is. So if we go back to the community page, r/Shaddy's group, we are going to see something very interesting when I try to vote. When I click on the vote here, you can see that it takes us to the community page. It does place the vote, but it still reroutes us to that page, and we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to reroute the user if they are trying to vote on the post. We only want to do that if they kind of click on the main body of the post here. And so this can be solved by what is called event propagation. So basically what's happening here is that these icons here have onClick functions attached to them, which is our onVote function, but our post item also has an onClick function. And since the vote icons are children of the post item, it's triggering both, and we do not want to do that. And we can stop this behavior with what is called event propagation. All we need to do to fix this is just accept the click event as an argument to our onVote function, and then call a function on that event called stop propagation. And that will prevent the event from traveling upwards to the parent, which in this case is our post item. All right, so let's add that as our first argument here. So it's going to be called event, and the type of this is going to be a React.mouse event because it is a click event, and the type of element that is generating this mouse event is going to be an SVG element because our upvote downvote icons are SVGs. And then as a second argument here, we can pass the mouse event type. And we can save this, and we're actually going to copy this, and we need to update our type declaration for this function inside of our post item here. So we can just add this as that first argument. Save this. Okay, and then we can come down to the onClick functions here, and all we need to do is, in both of these cases, I'm going to add the event as a first argument to this function here. Okay, so let's go back to our onVote function, and at the very top, the very first thing we're going to do is say event.stop propagation. Now, if I place a vote, we are not being redirected because that event is stopped dead in its tracks. It is not traveling upwards and triggering the onClick of the post item. Perfect. But if I still click on the other parts of the post item, it still takes us there, which is great. And now I can vote from in here. Very, very cool. Voting works in both pages. And we also need to add our event.stopPropagation function to our delete function, because right now, if we were to click on delete, it would do the exact same thing as the voting was before, and it would actually take us to the single post page view, which we do not want. So I'm going to copy this event type from here, because it's going to be the exact same in our delete function. Then inside of our post item, since we're handling the delete in here, I'm going to paste that event in here, and we just have to change this from an SVG element to an HTML div element, because that is the type of the component that's generating this event this time. And the very first thing we want to do in this function is the exact same stop propagation function as in our onVote. And also, if I delete a post from the single post page view, I want it to take us back to the community page. And so we already have this variable to detect if we are on the single post page. So we just can add a quick few lines here to reroute the user back to the community page if they are indeed deleting the post from the single post page. So we can bring in our router to do that. We can say const router is equal to useRouter. Then what we want to do after the post is successfully deleted is check, are we on the single post page view? If we are, then let's push the user back to the community page. So we can do that by doing router.push /r/ then the post.communityID. So now if I delete the post from the single post page view, it should take me back to this page, and that post should be gone. So now I can delete them from both the pages. So let's create a new one just to test this out. I don't want to delete that other one because it has the image in there. Hey dude, blah, 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 random, post this. Okay, so now if I delete this, I can delete it from both pages, just like the voting functionality. So perfect. So let's come back to our post ID page here. Now I want to show you something interesting. What happens if I refresh this page? What do you think is going to happen? Let's find out. Okay, so nothing is there. So the reason this is happening is because our selected post state is actually currently null. And why is this happening? Let's backtrack to the logic of how selected post actually got to be not null in the first place. If we go back to our post component, which is again on the community page, we sent this onSelectPost function to the post item component. And then when we clicked on a specific item within this list, it took that post and it put it in the selected post state. So right now, our PID page only works if we're coming from the community page. So if I click on this post, yeah, it works fine. I can go back. If I click on this, it works fine. But if I refresh this page, our app is not yet built to get the selected post, which is required if we are not coming directly from the community page. We want to build it so that they can visit this link directly and view that post without having to come from the community page, because that's probably a very common occurrence on Reddit. There's probably a lot of times where people share the links to certain posts, and then that person who received the link clicks on it, and they're visiting reddit.com to only view that post. They don't want to go to the community page and then go to the post page. You know what I mean? And as of right now, we could not share this link with anyone because they would come to this link and they'd be like, oh, well, nothing's here. Cool. So we just need to make a simple addition to account for this. All we need to do is on our post ID page, when a user visits this page, we can check if there is a selected post inside of the post state value. And if there is not, meaning that they are visiting this page directly and not coming from the community page, we can go and grab it ourselves from the database and then put it into the selected post state directly from here. And on this page, we have everything we need to do that. In the URL, we have the post ID, so we can query our database, grab that post, and then put it into state, and it'll function exactly as it was before. All right, so what we can do is create a function called fetchPost, and this is going to be responsible for fetching a single post from the database, and we are only going to call this sometimes, and we're going to see what that sometimes is. So this can take in a post ID of type string, and we're going to leave it empty for just a second. And we want to check if we need to call this function as soon as this page loads. And to do that, we can use a useEffect, because this is going to run as soon as the component mounts to the DOM. And I'm just going to leave the dependencies empty for now. So inside of this useEffect, we want to check a condition that will tell us whether or not we need to call our fetchPost function. And that condition is going to be if there is a valid post ID in the URL and there is no selected post, that means we need to call this function fetchPost and actually go and get this post, because that means the user has refreshed the page or they are visiting our website for the first time on this link. So we can grab the post ID from the URL using our next router. So we can bring that in up here. We can say const router is equal to useRouter. And on this page, we know that there is a parameter called PID inside of the router query. And it's called PID because that is what we called our dynamic route in our square brackets. So we can grab that value from our router.query object just like this. PID. Now we can write the logic for that condition that I just said a few seconds ago. So if there is a PID and there is no selected post inside of post state value, then we want to call our fetchPost function and pass it the PID as an argument. And again, TypeScript is freaking out here because the query parameter can technically be an array of strings or a string. In our case, it's always just going to be one post ID, so we're just going to typecast it to a string. Now, because the logic inside of our useEffect does depend on the router.query as well as the post state value selected post, we do need to add those as dependencies in this useEffect here. So we can say router.query as the first one and then post state value selected post as the second one. And that is it for this useEffect. All we have to do now is just write this function, which is very simple. It's just a single query to get this post from the database. We can, as usual, create a try catch block and log the error if it occurs. Fetch post error, log the error. And inside of our try block, we want to actually attempt to go and get this post document from our database. So we can create a reference to that document. So we can say post doc ref is equal to doc. Pass it our Firestore instance from client app. The collection we are getting this document from is posts, and the ID of this document is going to be the post ID argument of this function. And then we can actually get this document from our database, and we can create a new variable called postdoc, and we can use await get doc and pass it our postdoc ref, just like this. Okay, and now we can take this result and update our selected post state to contain the data from this document. So we can take our previous value of post state and we can update our selected post. And the value of selected post is going to be a post object with an ID that is postdoc.id and all of the data from the postdocs data. So we can spread postdoc.data, just like this. And then to satisfy TypeScript, we can typecast this as a type post. Awesome. And so I saved it, and you can see that it did go get that post for us. So now if I refresh this page, it actually gets the post for us, which is amazing. We do not have to come from the community page. And we are going to face this exact same refresh problem with our community data as well, because that data is originally coming from the community page. Let's go take a look at that community page, just as a reminder. So this page is server-side rendered. If you recall, we are calling the getServerSide props function, and we are getting the community data from the database, and then we are passing that to this community page here. So then we take this community data, put it into our current community state right here as soon as this page renders, and then we can access this state from the other pages that need it, like the submit page as well as the single post page like we're going to see. So if I were to go to the single post page, and we are going to display the about component on the right here, if you remember, right now, the current community data is populated with the Shaddy's group data. But if I refresh this page, it is not going to be there because, again, the home community page is responsible for completing that initial population. So we can only access it if we come to this post page or the submit page after the community page. So if we visit these pages directly, it is not going to be there. So we have the exact same problem that we had with our single post. And we can do something extremely similar to what we did here, where we just check for a community ID in the URL, and then we go, oh, okay, there's a community ID in the URL, but there's no current community in state. That must mean we didn't come directly from the community page, so we should go get the community data and put it in state directly from where we're trying to access it. And let me further illustrate this by actually bringing in the about component here so I can show you how it's going to be there initially, but not when we refresh the page, similar to our post item in this page. So we can bring in the about component, and this requires the community data as a prop. So we can grab that state from our useCommunityData hook up here, useCommunityData, make sure that imports, and the only value we want to grab from that hook in this component is going to be community state value. Then down here, we can pass the community state value .currentCommunity as a prop. Okay, and TypeScript is complaining because the current community is initialized as null, but we're telling the about component that we are always passing valid, truthy community data. So what I'm going to do is add a condition here to say we don't want to show the about component unless we actually have community state value .currentCommunity. So if I save this, you can see that this component does appear over here because we actually do have current community state right now because we came from our community page. But watch what happens when I refresh this. The same thing is going to happen, and it's not going to be there. So it's not. And you also notice that my post vote data is gone as well. I have upvoted this post, but after refreshing, that data is gone. And the reason our votes aren't there is because if we go to our use post hook, we had that use effect that gets our votes in a certain community only if there is a valid current community in state. And as of right now, that only occurs if we come directly from the community page. So inside of our useCommunityData hook, we are going to do the exact same thing that we are doing here. However, we are going to be looking for a current community as well as the community ID from the router.query in that case. So let's go over to our useCommunityData hook. So we're going to create that function called getCommunityData, and this is going to be asynchronous. And just like our fetchPost function, we are only going to call this sometimes, and that sometimes is when we are going directly to the single post page or directly to the submit page. We do not need to call this function if we do indeed come from the community page because the community data will already be in state. So underneath here, let's create a use effect. And I'm going to leave the dependencies empty for now. And I don't know if we have our router imported in here yet. We do not. Okay, so at the very top here, but beneath our user, I'm going to grab our router. So const router is equal to use router from next router. Then inside of this use effect, we can grab the community ID parameter from our router.query. So we can say router.query, and we want to destructure the community ID, which in this case is going to be Shaddy's group. Now we can write the exact same if statement as we did before with the post. We can say if there is a community ID and there is not a community state value .currentCommunity, we want to call that getCommunityData function, and we can pass in our community ID as an argument, just like this. And then up here, we just need to accept that like that as an argument. And then down here, this is the similar router type error we had before. We can just typecast that community ID to a string. And then up here, we just have to write a simple query to go and actually get the data for this community. All right, so let's create a try block. And first things first, log the error. Good old error handling. Then inside of our try block, we can create a reference to that community document is equal to doc Firestore. The collection we are interested in querying is the communities collection, and the ID of the document we want is community ID. Now let's actually get that document from our database by calling our getDoc function, and we can call this community doc is equal to await getDoc, pass in the document we want to get, which is community docref. And now all we need to do is just put the data from this community doc inside of our current community state. So we can call setCommunityStateValue, and we want to update the current community to be a community object with the ID of communitydoc.id and all of the data inside of that document. So we can spread communitydoc.data, and we can tell TypeScript that this is going to be of type community. Okay, and that is it for this function. Now all we have to do is just come down here and add those two dependencies to our useEffect dependency array. First one, router.query, and communityStateValue.currentCommunity, just like this. So now if I save, you saw that the community data is now in state, so the about community component appears, and it went and got our postVotes for this community. Because again, if we go back to look at this useEffect here, this is listening to changes in the current community state, and it's like, oh, now there's actually a current community there. I should go get the votes for this community. And so then it did, and amazing. So now I should be able to refresh this page without coming directly from the community page, and it should just go and get that data for us. Perfect, so that is great, and that improves our user experience significantly, and it makes our product realistic. So now what I'm going to do is, I think I forgot to put the about component on the submit page, actually. Yeah, I did. So let's go to our submit page here. Yeah, I totally forgot to put that in there. And so we are grabbing our community state value from Recoil, but I'm going to change this to get the community state value from our useCommunityData hook so that it actually triggers this useEffect here, because the useEffect is only going to trigger from that component if the component calls that hook. So let's comment this out, and we want to get this same value from our useCommunityData hook, so make sure that imports. And we want to only grab the community state value. So if I save this, this component is actually going to call that hook now, which is going to trigger that useEffect, which should have populated the current community state. So if I look at this log over here, so you can see that it did go and get the community data. So now if I bring in our about component here, drop it into our right-hand side fragment, and then as our community data prop, we can pass in community state value dot current community. And then same thing, as our PID page, we can add a guard here to only show this component if we do have a truthy community state value in state. So if I save this, now that component appears on the right-hand side, and I should be able to refresh this page, and the same exact thing should happen. Perfect. That is amazing. We no longer have to come from the community page to see this data here, and that is perfect. So if I go into here, if I sent the link to somebody now they can actually see the post and see the community data and everything, see the votes and whatever. So awesome. Now our app is so much more versatile and realistic, and link sharing is possible. So I'm glad we covered that because it is very, very important, and we can now move on. All right, you guys, we're now going to move on to building the commenting on post functionality, which I think is a super exciting feature, and it's really fun to build. And it's pretty much the exact same thing as creating a post, but it's actually easier because we don't have images to deal with. The first thing I want to talk about is how we are going to model this data in our database, because that's always a good place to start. So let's go to our database, and let's briefly talk about the way we are going to structure our comments collection. So really, we're faced with two different options for storing the comments in our database. We could either create a top-level comments collection at the same level as these ones here, communities, posts, and users, or we could create a comments sub-collection on the post document. And either one of these are fine in different circumstances. But in our circumstance, we need to think about how we're actually querying the comment data, because again, how the data is displayed on the screen, what your queries are going to look like should really drive how you model your data. And in our case, we are going to store our comments as a top level collection here along with the post communities and users rather than a sub collection on the posts. And here is why. If we go to the realreddit.com and we go to our profile page, this is just a random Reddit account that I made for the purpose of this demo, you can see that there is a section on our profile page called comments. So on this page would display a complete history of all of the comments you have made on Reddit, which means that there are sections of the app that require access to comment data outside of just the post. Now we are not going to build this profile page, but I did want to model our data to best reflect Reddit in case you did want to build this functionality on top of this project. If we wanted all of the comments that we ourselves have made, think about how much harder that query would be if the comments were stored as a sub-collection on the posts. We would have to query every single post and then go into all of those posts and see if there's a comment that we have made, like where the comment has an author ID that matches our user ID. That's really inefficient and doesn't really seem necessary. And so that's why I decided to store the comments as a top level collection up here, because we can query the collection directly then, right? We can just go, let's go find all of the comments where the author ID matches my user ID. And for the posts, it's just as easy to find all of the comments with a certain post ID. So it's sort of the best of both worlds here. It simplifies our lives significantly if we just have the comments up here as a top level collection. So I just wanted to discuss these two ways of modeling the data because again, with NoSQL, we have all of this freedom. And my first thought actually was to put a sub collection on the post, right? Because it makes so much sense. Like, oh, I only really need to see the comments of a post if I already know the post. Therefore, I'm going to store it as a sub collection. But then I was like, oh, well, on reddit.com, there's this whole comments section of your profile. And so making that query with the sub collection pattern would be very, very challenging, which is what led me to decide to store the comments up here as a sibling of post rather than as a child of post. Just wanted to clarify that because I don't want to just be like, oh, we're modeling the data this way, accept it. I wanted to provide some food for thought. So I hope that is helpful. And now we can actually build the functionality into our app. Okay, so let's go back to our app and it's going to be on this PID page that we're going to build in the comments functionality. So let's go into here and the comments is going to be, as I have indicated here, a sibling of the post item inside of the left-hand side fragment here. So let's actually build the real comments component. So inside of our directory here and inside of the posts folder, I'm going to create another folder inside of here called comments because the comments are a child of a post. And so then inside of here, I'm going to create the main root file of this folder, which is going to be comments.tsx. I'm going to use our snippet, txcd, and then I'm going to just put the text in here. Here are the comments. Awesome. I'm going to close my directory, come back to our PID page, and actually import the real comments component here. Comments. Just like this. And so now we should see that show up right there. And just again, to look at our demo, let's go look at what we're actually creating here. So I'll click on this post. And this is it. We just have an input and the actual comments themselves. Let's start off with the props that we're going to accept in our comment component here. So the first prop we're going to take in is going to be our user object. So this is going to be of type user. Make sure this type imports from Firebase Auth. Our second prop is going to be our selected post, which is going to be of type post. Make sure that imports as well. And then the third one is going to be the community ID because we are going to store this on all of our new comments. Then we can destructure them from the props down here. So user, selected post, as well as community ID, just like this. All right, and let's go back to our app so we can see what we are building. And let's briefly define the functions that are going to be in this component to provide some clarity as we are building this out. All right, so the first function in here is going to be the function that actually creates our comments. So this is going to be called onCreateComment, and it is going to be asynchronous because it is going to talk to our database, and it's going to take in an argument that is called commentText, and that is going to be a string, and we're going to leave it empty for now. Our second function is going to be responsible for deleting a comment. This is also going to be asynchronous, and this is going to take in a comment, but this is going to be of type comment, which we have not created yet, which we're going to do in a second, but for now I'm just going to make it any so that TypeScript doesn't kill us. And our third function is going to be responsible for fetching all of the comments for this post. So I'm going to call this getPostComments asynchronous and empty for now. And the very last thing I'm going to create is going to be a useEffect because we want to do something as soon as this component mounts. And that thing we want to do is get the post comments for this post that we're currently looking at. And we only want to run this once, so I'm going to leave the dependency array empty. So essentially, as soon as this component mounts to the DOM, it's going to go fetch the comments from the database and then put them in stage so that we can actually see them on the screen. So that is pretty much the skeleton of this component, and now we just have to fill all of these things up. Let's build out the actual container for our comments component. So we can get rid of that div there, and our outermost component is going to be a box from Chakra, and we are going to give this box a background of white and a border radius of 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 4 pixels, 4 pixels. And then in here, I'm just going to say, here are our comments so that we can see something show up on the screen. And you'll notice that these border radius inputs are just sort of the complete opposite of the border radius inputs for the post item. And it's to make it appear as though it is a single component there. They sort of look like one. If you go to the demo, they look like it looks like one massive thing. And we are doing that by having the border radiuses sort of mirror each other, so to speak. And we're also going to give this a padding of 2. All right, we can get rid of this text, and inside of here, we're going to have a flexbox, so import that from Chakra, and inside of this flexbox is where our comment input component is going to go, which we are going to create in just a second here, but let's style out this flexbox first. We're going to give this a direction of column, padding left of 10, padding right of 4, and a margin bottom of 6. We're going to give this a font size of 10 point, and a width of 100%. Perfect. And actually, before we create our comment input, let's create the state that we're going to have in this component here. So the first piece of state we're going to create is going to be for our actual comment input and is going to represent the actual comment text that the user is entering when they're creating a new comment. So we're going to call this comment text, set comment text, and we're going to initialize this to be an empty string. Our second piece of state is going to be all of our comments for this post that come from the database. And so we are going to initialize this to be an empty array. Okay, and we're going to have 2 loading states here, one for fetching our comments and one for creating a comment. We want to keep them separate because they are 2 separate things. So our first one is going to be called fetch loading, set fetch loading, and it's going to be equal to useState, initialize it as false. The second loading state is going to be called create loading and set create loading, and also false. Okay, so that's going to be it for now. Now let's create the component for our actual comment input. So inside of our comments folder, I'm going to create another file called commentinput.tsx and use our snippet. And let's define the props that this is going to take. So the first prop is going to be that comment text state component that we declared before. The second one is going to be the set comment text function, and this is going to take in a value of type string, and it is going to return void. The third one is going to be our user, which is going to be of type user. The third one is going to be our loading state for creating a comment, because we're going to need that one in here to display a loading state when the user presses create comment. So we're going to have this be Boolean here. And the last one is going to be our onCreateComment function, because that is the function they're going to call when they click on the create comment button. And this is going to take in a piece of comment text, and it's going to return nothing. Now down here, we can destructure all of these: comment text, set comment text, user, loading, and onCreateComment, just like that. Now for this component, what I'm going to do for the sake of time is just paste in all of the HTML for it, because it's pretty much just a input with a bunch of fancy styling and a button. So I figured it's not worth going through a bunch of CSS. So I thought it'd be better to focus more on the actual commenting and creating comments functionality. I will put a link directly to this component on my GitHub down below so you can grab it as well. So I'm just going to drop this in here and add all of the missing imports, command period. I love that keyboard shortcut. And text, as always, does not like to auto import. So I'm going to throw that in here manually. Perfect. So this is all styled, and all of those functions that we passed in are hooked up to it properly. It's just an input with a button and then with an onClick that calls our onCreateComment function. So nothing super fancy that you're missing here, just a bunch of fancy CSS that I thought was not worth going through because we've already seen so much of this already. It's more fun to actually work on the creation of comments, in my opinion. So let's come back to our comments component and import that actual comment input from that file. And now we can pass it the required props. So the first one is going to be our comment text, which is going to be equal to our comment text state variable. The second one is going to be set comment text. I do not like when I don't get autocomplete, but sometimes you just can't have everything you want. Okay, the third one is going to be the user. So we are going to pass in the user, which I believe we still have to get. Oh no, it's coming as a prop. Okay. And then we can pass in our create loading state, create loading. Let's save this so that it formats. And then the last one is going to be our onCreateComment function. onCreateComment. Okay, so I save this, and as you can see here, we are displaying this component here that's asking the user to log in or sign up. And this is just part of the comment input component that basically just checks if the user exists or if it does not. And if it does not, it just asks them to log in or sign up. And the reason that it is saying we are unauthenticated, even though we are logged in, is because we are not yet receiving a user as a prop to this comments component. So let's fix that so that we can actually see the real component. Fun fact, this is the exact same auth buttons component that was used in our navbar. This is why I love React, and the reusability of components is so cool. Okay, so let's actually pass the user in to our component here. User is equal to user. Okay, and we are also needing the selected post, which is going to be our post date value dot selected post. And we also want to pass in our community ID, which we could get from the router, but we can also get access to it from post date value dot selected post dot community ID. Okay, so TypeScript is not happy with the misalignment of types here. So what I'm going to do for the user is I'm going to typecast this to be of type user. And for the community ID, I'm also going to typecast this to a string. However, for the selected post, what I'm going to do is just come into our comments component here and change the type of our selected post. Since our selected post is initialized as null in our post date atom, I'm going to use the pipe operator and add null as another type for this prop here. So if I save this and go back, this should now be happy and we should be good to go. And now we can actually see our new fancy input component here, which is super cool. Our button is even hooked up to our onCreateComment function, although it's empty, but it is hooked up. Once we build out the logic here, it will work. All right, let's start writing out the onCreateComment function and actually start storing some comments in the database. So when we create a comment, there are two things we need to do. The first thing is, of course, creating a comment document in the database. The second thing is we need to update the post's number of comments. Because if we go back to our database here, you might remember that we store a field on our post documents called number of comments. And the reason we do that is because if we go to our demo here, we do store that information. You can see it here. And it is also displayed on all of the post items here. So 328 and 4 and 458. So that is the data coming from the number of comments field on that post document. So we need to update that as well every single time we create a comment. So update post number of comments. All right, and for both of these operations, it makes sense to either have both of them succeed or none of them succeed. So for that reason, we are going to use batch writes once again because they are amazing, and why not? They help keep our data super clean with a high level of integrity. And then once our batch write successfully completes, we can update our client Recoil state to show the new comment as well as the new number of comments. And then in the awesome. Okay. All right. So, okay. Perfect. And then in our delete function, we're going to do pretty much very similar things. We are going to delete the comment document. We are also going to update the post number of comments, but this is going to be -1. Up here was +1. And then we are going to also update the recoil state as well to reflect those changes. So let's work on the creation of comments. So let's create a try catch block as usual, and we will log the error. on create comment. Error. All right, then at the top of our try block, we can create our batch instance using our writeBatch function from Firestore. Pass it our Firestore instance. And let's work on this first thing of creating a comment document. Our new comment object is going to be of type comment, which we have not created yet. So let's do that now. And for now, we're just going to put it at the top of this file, but we are going to move it to the CommentItem component once we actually create that component very shortly. So we can say export type comment. So our comments are going to have an ID, which is of type string, a creator ID, so we know the user that created this, the creator display text, so that we can display that on the UI, the community ID that belongs to this post that we're commenting on, the ID of the post that this comment belongs to, the title of the post, and as well as the comment text itself. And the last thing is going to be our created at timestamp, which is going to be of type timestamp. Make sure that imports from Firebase/Firestore. And that is it. So now down here, when we're creating a comment, I'm actually going to create a reference to this new comment document so that we can use the ID on our new object here. So we can say const comment doc.ref is equal to doc from Firestore. And we can pass this a collection reference of the collection we want to store this document in. And that collection is going to be our comments collection, just like this. And now we can populate our new comment object. So we can pass this an ID of comment docref.id, the creator ID of user.uid, a creator display text, which if you remember was our user's email, and then we split the email at the @sign, and then we grabbed the first element in that split array, and we are actually going to add the bang operator here because we know that the user is going to be defined at this point because only authenticated users can create comments. We can add in our community ID. The post ID is going to be the selected post.id, and we are going to again add the bang operator here because we know that at this point we are going to have a selected post. The post title is going to be our selected post.title. Again, can add the bang operator. And our text is actually going to be our state variable, which is going to be comment text. And we actually don't need to accept this as an argument to this function here. We can just use it directly from state. I don't know why I initially passed that as an argument. It doesn't really matter, but we don't really need to, so I'm just going to use the state variable. All right, and for our created at, we are going to use our server timestamp function, and we're going to typecast this to a timestamp to avoid the type conflict between the server types and the client types, just like this. Okay, then we can actually add the creation of this document to our batch operations. So the document we want to create is going to be our comment docref, and the data we want to store in that document is going to be our new comment. Now let's update our post document's number of comments field. So let's move that comment down here. So let's create a reference for the post document that we are updating. So we can say post.docref is equal to doc, pass this our Firestore instance. The collection that this document in is posts, and the ID of this document is selected post.id. And to fix this compiler error here, we can do one of two things. We can either add the bang operator like we were doing up here, or we can typecast this to be a string. Either is fine, but we do know at this point that we are going to have a valid selected post. To be consistent with above, I'm going to add the bang operator here to tell TypeScript that it is safe to proceed. Then we can add the update to our batch operations. The document we are updating is post.docref, and the update we want to make is to the number of comments field on this post, and we want to increase this value by 1, so we can call our increment function from Firestore and give it the value 1, just like this. Now we can actually write those operations to the database, so we can say await batch.commit. And then after our database documents have been successfully created and updated, we can update our client Recoil state. So the first thing we want to do is set our comment text to be empty, so we can clear the input. And the other piece of state we have to update is our comments array. We want to add this new comment to the top of that array so that it shows the updated list on the UI. So we can call our setComments function, and we want to take the previous value of this array and update it to be a new array with the new comment at the top and all of the previously existing ones behind it. And this is complaining because type never Okay, yeah, so I think we have to specify the type of this comment state here. And since we have our comment type defined, we can indicate to React that this is going to be an array of comments, and that should satisfy this array down here. Perfect. Okay, so TypeScript is happy. I can save this, and I think all we are missing is our loading state, actually. So at the top of our try block, we can set create loading to be true, and then at the bottom, we can set create loading to be false, just like that. Okay, so let's actually test out this function because our button is actually hooked up to it. So we should be able to create a comment. Let's go to our database, and what should happen is we should see a new collection appear in here called comments with a new comment. But we should also see that this post, this one we're looking at right here, should have an updated number of comments with a value of 1. So let's try this out and see what happens. So I'm going to do, hey, nice post, dude. Click comment. Okay, it it didn't even load, like the loading state didn't trigger. Are we sure we have that hooked up? Comment input on create comment, comment text. Okay. What is happening here? I'm not sure. Is our React, did anything get created in the database? No. Okay, nothing got created. I'm gonna just try maybe refreshing this. Maybe my hot module thing was being weird. Okay, so let's try leaving another comment. Hey, dude, nice post. Okay, so that seemed to work. Though I don't know what was happening before. Okay, so if I go to the database now, we can see that the number of comments on the post was updated, and I just have to refresh the database because the comments collection is being created for the first time. And yes, it was created, and we can see that brand new comment in there, which is super cool. So obviously our batch write worked because it created the comment, and our post number of comments was updated. So let's create another comment. Second one, comment. This was updated to 2, and that second comment should be in there. Second one, nice. All right, so now we are able to successfully create comments. So let's go back to our app, and there is actually one more piece of Recoil state that we have to update here, and that is going to be the selected posts number of comments here. We did that on our post document in the database, but we do want to do it in the client as well so that those changes are reflected on the UI right away. So in order to update our selected post, we are going to need our set post state function from Recoil. So we can bring that in up here. We can say set post state, and we only need to set post state here. We don't really need to read from it. So we can use our use set Recoil state hook and pass in our post state atom. Then down here, after adding the new comment to the comments array, we can call our set post state function, take our previous value, and the value that we want to update here is selected post. And we only want to update one field on the selected post, and that field is going to be the number of comments. So we can spread the previous value of selected post, prev.selectedPost, and we just want to update the number of comments to be incremented by 1. And the way we can do that is we can just say prev.selectedPost dot number of comments plus 1. And we can tell TypeScript that this new post object is indeed of type post. And then we can add the bang operator here to tell TypeScript that we know that there is going to be a selected post at this point. So now if I were to go make a comment on this post, I should see this number here update without refreshing the page. Hey dude, this is cool. This is cool. So if I comment, you can see that changed to a 3 immediately, which is super cool. Awesome. So now all we have to do is create our CommentItem component so that we can actually see the comments of this post underneath here. All right, so let's work on the CommentItem component here. So inside of our directory here, inside of the comments folder, I'm going to create a new file called commentItem.tsx. And this is going to represent an individual comment item similar to a post item. So let's use our snippet in here, close our directory. And I mentioned before that we were going to move this comment type over to this comment item file once we had created it. So that's what I'm going to do now. And the reason I'm doing this is just because I feel like it just makes sense to store the individual comment type inside of the individual comment item component Just a preference of mine though, it doesn't really matter where you store it, to be honest. So let's import this timestamp from Firestore, save this, and now we just need to go back to our comments and actually import this comment type from that file we just created. So let's do import from CommentItem, and we want to import the comment type there. And now this should be happy down here. We can save this and go back, and I'm actually going to move this above the comment item props. I feel like if you have multiple types inside of your React components, the component props type should be at the bottom, kind of closest to the component. Just a preference, honestly, that's just what I do. It doesn't really matter, but up to you. All right, so the first prop that this thing is going to take in is going to be the actual comment itself, so we can declare this as a type of comment. Our second prop is going to be our onDelete comment function, because we're going to be able to call that directly from within the commentItem component. This is going to take in a comment argument, which is of type comment, and it's going to return void. Our third prop is going to be a Boolean that represents if we are in the process of deleting this comment, so I'm going to call it loading_delete. And I will explain more about this in a bit once we have the component actually built out. And the fourth one is going to be the user ID, so that we can know if the current user is the creator of this comment, so that we can display the option to delete it to them if they are. All right, let's come down here and destructure our props. Comment, onDelete comment, loading_delete, and user ID. All right, so let's go to our demo and look at what a comment item actually looks like. So we have the icon here. We have the username, we have the time that the comment was posted, we have the text itself, and then we have the option to edit and delete it. And we're only going to build the delete functionality. We're not going to build the edit functionality, but you can see here that as a creator of this comment, I have the option to edit and delete it, whereas these ones I am not the creator, so I cannot see those icons. So that is the reason why we are passing in the user ID here as a prop. All right, so let's go back to our app. So let's get rid of this div here, and we can start off by creating the outermost container, which is going to be just a flexbox from Chakra. Now, the first component in here is going to be the actual Reddit icon that we saw in the demo. So this is going to be contained within a box component. So bring that in from Chakra, and we're going to have a icon. And this icon is going to be our FA Reddit icon. And I'm just going to import all of the icons here that we are going to be using. So I'm going to paste in these imports at the top here. And these look like this. There's only 3 of them. Perfect. Okay, so then the first one is going to be that FA Reddit. Then right next to our icon container, we're going to create a stack here. And this is going to contain all of the actual content of the comment. And we're going to give this a spacing of 1. The first thing inside of here is going to be another stack, but this is going to be a row stack, and this is going to contain the username as well as the created@at timestamp. So we can declare the direction of this to be row, and we want to make the align center, so everything's vertically aligned, and we're going to make everything inside of here font size of 8 point. And we're going to have 2 pieces of text in here. One is going to be the username, and one is going to be the timestamp. So let's bring in text from Chakra, because as usual, we do not get that auto import for some reason. Don't know why. I mention that every single time, and you're probably like, yo, we get it. We get the text does not auto import. We get it. Okay, so then the first one is going to be our comment dot creator display text, which is sort of our like little username thing. And then our second one is going to be that timestamp, and we are going to use moment once again so that we can get a nice formatted timestamp 10 minutes ago or 4 months ago or whatever. So our moment function takes in a new date object, and the date we're going to pass is going to be our comment.created@.seconds, because the type of this is a timestamp and that has the seconds parameter attached to it. And we're going to need to multiply this by 1,000, and then we can call the dot from now method from moment to declare this as that nice 4 minutes ago or 8 months ago type of text. Okay, so TypeScript is not happy because created@ could possibly be undefined. And what I'm going to do is actually remove the question mark here and make this not optional, because it's always going to be there. So I'm just going to save this, and we don't need optional chain here at this point. So now that we have just a little bit of this built out, let's go back to our comments and actually iterate through our comments and create the comment items for the existing comments so that we can actually see what we're doing when we're building out this comment item. Okay, so underneath this flex container here, I'm going to create a stack. And this stack, we want to give a spacing of 6, and this is going to space out all of our comments very nicely. And within the stack, this is where we want to actually display all of our comment items. So we want to take our comments array and map through all of them and take each one and create a new comment item. Okay, and the props you need to pass into this comment item is the comment itself. Comment is equal to comment, our onDelete comment function, onDelete comment, our loading delete, which for now is just going to be false, but we're going to come back to this, as well as the user ID, which is going to be the current user.uid. Perfect. So we can save this, and now we can see that we have something here. We have not fetched all of the comments from the database yet, so only the ones we have created on the front end are going to be here because we have not fetched them. And I did create that one a few minutes ago. That's why there's one here. Like, so if I create another one now, hey dude, it should show up right immediately in state here. Okay, so we're getting an invalid date here, and this has to do with our created at timestamp, and we're going to fix that. Should I do that now or after the styles? Okay, let's do the date now, actually. So the reason that this invalid date thing is happening is because of this server timestamp function here. If you remember from a while ago, I mentioned that the server timestamp function is actually only callable on the Firebase servers. So we tell Firebase that we want our created at field to be a server timestamp so that when this object does reach the Firebase servers, Firebase will call this function and it will create that timestamp for us. But on our client, we actually cannot call this function. And since we want to put this comment into our client state right away without having to go fetch from the database, we do need to actually sort of manually create our own timestamp here with our own seconds field on it. With our posts, we did not have to do that because we created a post using the server timestamp function, and then we went back to the community page and all the posts were fetched from the database after the server timestamp was successfully created on the Firebase servers. But in this case, we are taking this thing and immediately inserting it into client state so that it shows up on the screen immediately. There is no fetching after creating a comment. My point in saying that is we do need to manually create our own timestamp on the client so that we can see a valid date here. Okay, so what we can do to fix this is after adding this new comment write operation to our batch, we can take this new comment object and modify the created at field so that it works on our client and set this equal to our own little client version of a timestamp. And our timestamp needs to contain a seconds field on it here. And the value we want to set to our seconds, you can use our date object from JavaScript and call the .now method on it. And then we want to divide this by 1000. And then we can tell TypeScript that this is a timestamp because it's sort of our own little custom version of a timestamp so that it works on our client. So now I can save this. And if I were to create a comment now, we should see a valid date. Will this work? Date. Comment. Perfect. So you can see now that we're seeing a few seconds ago. And so Moment is able to actually read that as a valid date because the seconds thing actually exists on the created at thing now. Awesome. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of confusing and it's kind of weird with this whole server timestamp thing, but this is a way around it so that we can directly insert this thing into our client state. All right, let's go back to our comment item and actually continue building out the UI and fix up these styles a bit. So on our creator display text, we are going to change the font weight of this to be heavy, 700. And then for our date, we are going to change the color to be gray, 600. And let's actually change the style of this icon up here as well. We are going to make the font size equal to 30 to make it much larger. And then we can make the color of it gray, 300. Very nice. That looks very good. All right, now underneath this inner stack here, we're going to actually show the comment text itself, which is probably the most exciting part of the comment. So inside of this text, we want to say comment.text. And we can style this to have a font size of 10 point to make it slightly smaller. There we go. We can see the actual comment there. And then underneath here, we're going to create another stack, which is going to contain all of the user actions that is on a comment. So like these icons, the edit delete buttons, it's going to be a row stack. So that's all spaced nicely. Okay, so let's make the direction of this equal to row. And we're going to vertically align our items again. So we can say center for our align. We want to make everything inside of here cursor pointer because they're all sort of clickable actions. And we're going to make the color of everything inside of here gray 500. Now the first two things inside of the stack are going to be the upvote and downvote icons that we see on the comments. So the first one is going to be the IO arrow up circle outline, and the second one is going to be the down one. So we can paste this in here and just change this to IO arrow down. Perfect, looks very good. Then underneath here, we want to show the edit and delete option, but only if the user ID is equal to the comment's creator ID. Only if I'm the owner of this comment do I want to see these options here. And we can create a fragment from within here, and we're going to have two pieces of text, and one is going to say edit, and the other is going to say delete. And we're only, again, building the delete functionality, but this is where you would put the edit functionality if you decide to build that. So on both of these, I'm going to add some common styling, and the styling for these is going to be font size of 9 point and hover styling of a color of blue 500, just like this. And then on the delete, since we actually have this functionality built in, we're going to add the onClick function, and this is going to call our onDelete comment function. And we're going to pass in the comment prop, just like this. So now we actually have this hooked up to our delete function, so when we build it, it will actually work. Okay, and one thing up here next to our created@ text is we're going to actually also add a loader for when the user does delete this comment. We're going to display a little spinner here indicating that the delete is in progress, and that's sort of where this loading delete boolean is going to come into play. So right here, I'm going to add that in, and I'm going to say, if loading delete is true, we want to show this spinner. So bring in the spinner from Chakra, and we're just going to make the size of this small. Cool, so if I make this true, just so we can see what this looks like, that is what that looks like. It looks really cool, and it just tells the user that the deletion is in progress. Awesome, and I think I forgot to add padding on the stack container of all of these comments because it looks like they're not positioned properly. So here on this stack here, I'm going to add a padding of 2. There we go, that looks much better. And while we are here, actually, I'm going to use this fetch loading parameter to display a skeleton loader for our comments because that makes it look so much better. So inside of this stack here, I'm going to create a ternary operator that is going to see if fetch loading is true. If it is true, we are going to display our loader, and if it is not, we're going to display our comments. So I'm just going to paste in the loader from the component because it's just a bunch of skeleton components here. And let's add these missing imports. Cool, and I have this like hard-coded 0, 1, 2 array just so that it creates 3 of these box skeleton components here. So if the fetch is complete, meaning that we are in the falsiness of this ternary operator, we want to display to the user that there are no comments if the comments array is empty after they have been fetched. So inside of here, I'm going to create another fragment, and in this fragment, I'm going to add the condition to check if the comments.length is equal to 0. And if it is, we are going to display this component that says no comments yet. And I'm just going to paste that in. It's just a flex box with some text in it. So that is what this looks like. And if we do have comments in our array, we want to show them. So then I can create another fragment over here. And inside of here, we want to actually put in this comments.map function, just like that. So I can save that. And now I need to just import text from Chakra. Save this. So now if I refresh this page, because we have not created our fetch comments function yet, we should see this thing here that says, yeah, no comments yet, even though there are comments. But again, we haven't created our fetch function yet to create our initial value of comments. So pretending that there are no comments, this is what that would look like. Okay, so let's write out this getPostComments function so that we can see the initial state of this post comments when this component loads. Right now we can see that there are 5. So once we write this out, the initial value of our array should contain those comments after they have been fetched. And all we need to do inside of here is query our comments collection to find all of the comments with the post ID of the selected post's ID. So we can create a try block, and inside of here, let's log the error, get post comments. Then inside of our try block, I'm going to create an object called comments query that we're going to pass to our getDocs function to perform the query. So we can create this using our query function from Firestore. The first argument to our query function is going to be a collection reference to the collection we are querying. We can pass this our Firestore instance, And the collection we are querying is comments. The second argument is going to be our where clause. Which set of documents do we want to get from the comments collection? We want to get all of the comments where the post ID of the comment is equal to the currently selected post's ID. So selected post.id. Let's save this so that it formats. Then as the third argument to our query, we can tell Firebase how we want these ordered by. So we can pass in our order by function, make sure that imports from Firestore, and we want to order by the created at field in descending order so that they come in with the latest comments at the top. Now we can actually fetch this set of documents from our database. So let's create a new object called commentDocs, and we can call our getDocs function and pass in our comments query. Then after we get all of these documents back from Firestore, we want to extract all of the data out of them and store them in state. So we can create our new comments array, and we can map through our commentDocs.docs, so commentDocs.map, and we can take each document and extract the data out of it and create a new JavaScript object with the ID of doc.id, and then we can spread all of the data inside of that document. So we can save this. Now all we have to do is put this in our comment state. So we can say set comments and throw in our comments result from Firestore, and we can tell TypeScript that this is going to be an array of comments, so we can indicate that like this. And actually, what I'm going to do is initialize our fetch loading to be true. So as soon as this component renders, we can indicate to the user that the fetch is in progress, because that is sort of exactly what is happening. So if we save this, this is what those loaders look like. I think they look so cool. I don't know why I love these skeleton loaders so much. I don't know if everyone gets as excited about those as I do, but they just look so good to me. And then once this fetch has been complete, get post comments, at the very end of our try catch, we can set our fetch loading to be false. Perfect. Okay, so we are getting an error here, and I believe it is because, yes, we do need an index on our comments collection. This is what we had to do with our posts as well, if you remember. In order to perform queries on our collection, we do need an index on that collection. So what we can do is just click on this link and do the exact same thing as we did last time. This will open up the console, and let's create the index on our comments collection by just clicking create index. And this will take a few minutes. I think last time it took about 4 to 5 minutes, so come back when this is done. Okay, we are back, and the index has been successfully created with a status of enabled. So now if I go back to the app and I refresh this page here, we should see those comments, which we are not. Cool. Okay, there's another error here. Function where called with invalid data, unsupported field value, undefined. Okay. All right, so I think what's happening here is it is trying to make this query here, but our selected post ID is undefined on the first render of this component because we do need to go fetch that from the database and actually populate state. So there is a moment where the selected post is null and the ID is undefined. So to prevent this, what we can do is actually add a dependency in this use effect here and only call the getPostComments function when we do indeed have the selected post successfully fetched from the database and in state. Okay, so we can add a dependency here of selected post. Then, as we've seen before, we can protect against running this function by simply checking for the truthiness of the selected post. And if there is no selected post, we can just return out of the use effect and not call our function. So let's save this, and that should work. And it seems to have worked. But let's try refreshing the page and make sure that that actually does work. Perfect. So it does work. That looks amazing. I love it. And we should be, okay, no, I was just going to say we should be able to delete them, but we have not written out that function yet. I'm getting ahead of myself here. And this error in the console is saying that we do not have a key prop in our comments item. So yes, when we do map through the items here, we want to add a key as required by React. And the key, we can just make the comment.id. If I refresh, so we get rid of that ugly error in the console, we can see all of the nice loading state, boom. And to make this even actually a bit cleaner, we can hide our input completely until the comments have been fetched as well, just so we don't see the input as the only thing on the screen while they're being fetched. So we can add a condition here to only show the comment input if we are not in the process of fetching these comments. So now if I refresh, Awesome. That looks just a little bit better, but it makes a big improvement in my opinion. So that looks amazing. All we have to do now is write out the delete function, which is pretty much just the complete opposite of the create function. So not super difficult there. And then we will be able to delete comments, create comments, and we will be done with the comment functionality. And we are even closer to the finished product. All right, you guys, all we have left to do to complete our commenting functionality is to write out the onDelete comment function. And if you remember, we outlined the steps that we are going to do inside this function, and they are pretty much just the mirror actions of the onCreate comment function. So nothing crazy here, and we just have to undo the creation of one. So underneath these comments, I'm going to create a try catch block, and I'm going to remove that return statement there. And we can start off by logging the error. onDelete comment. Okay, and let's move these comments into our try block. And let's start off with deleting our comment document. So we are going to need to create our batch instance because we are going to be working with batch operations. So we can bring in our write batch function and pass this our Firestore instance. Okay, let's create a reference to the document that we're going to be deleting. So we can say comment.ref is equal to doc, passes our Firestore instance. The collection we are deleting from is comments, and the ID of the document we are deleting is comment.id. And we can actually change the type of this to a comment now because we have that type defined. Then we can add the delete operation to our batch.delete, and we are deleting the comment document. Okay, second thing in our batch is going to be updating the number of post comments on the post document. So we can create a document reference to that post. So post.ref is equal to doc, that's our Firestore instance, posts collection, and the ID of the post we are updating is going to be our selected post.id. And we can add the bang operator here. And then we can add the update operation to our batch, exact same as what we did in the creation of posts. And we are updating our post.ref. And the update we want to make is to the number of comments field. And we want to increment this by -1, decrease it by 1. So that is it for our batch operations. Now we can actually write these to the database. So we can say await batch.commit. And then when those have successfully completed, we just need to update our client state. So let's do that. All right, so just like in the creation of a comment, we updated the number of comments on the selected post by 1. So now we're just going to decrease it by 1. So we can do that by calling our setPostState function, take the previous value, and we want to update the selected post. And the field we want to update on the selected post is number of comments. And we want to take the previous value of the number of comments and subtract 1 from it. And we can add the bang operator here. And then we can tell TypeScript that this is an object of type post. Now what we need to do is just remove that comment from our comments array. So we can filter our comments. So we can say set comments, take the previous value of this array, and turn it into a filtered version by calling prev.filter. Take each previous comment item and check to make sure that its ID does not equal to the ID of the comment that we are deleting. So save this. So the very last thing we are going to do is implement our loading state for deleting. And if you remember, we just temporarily passed in a value of, where is it here? A value of false, but we're actually going to implement this now. Now, if you remember what the spinners look like on these things, we had individual loading state for each individual comment item, so we knew which one was in the process of being deleted. And so there are 2 ways to do this. And if you remember from deleting a post, if we go back to our usePost hook here, on our delete post function, what we did was we had this function return a promise, and we called this function from within inside of our post item like this. We created another function called handleDelete that is local to the post item, and that function called our onDelete post function, which returned a promise. And this allowed us to do independent error handling and loading handling in each individual post item. And in this case, we're going to do a little bit of a different approach, just so I can show you another method to do this. Inside of our comments function here, rather than having loading state declared in each individual comment item, we are going to have a single delete loading state. So we are going to create a single state variable for our deletion So rather than using a Boolean like the other one, so just true or false, sort of this binary method here, we are going to instead have this be a string state variable. And when I click on a particular comment to delete it, it is going to set the delete loading ID to be that comment's ID. That way, when we're mapping through our comment items here, we can use that logic to send a Boolean to the specific comment item, and it will have a true or false of whether or not this is the one that is being deleted. It's very, very similar to having selected state. If you remember, like in our new post form nav, we were able to determine which one was currently clicked on. Very similar here, very similar idea. So hopefully this will make more sense once we write it out if you're kind of confused. So we're going to call this loading delete ID and set loading delete ID. And as I mentioned, we are going to declare this as a string, not a Boolean. And an empty string is falsy, so we're pretty much initializing it as false. And inside of our onDelete comment function at the very top, we want to set loading delete ID to be the ID of the comment that we are trying to delete. And at the bottom down here, we can set it equal to an empty string, which is again falsy. Then down here, to actually pass this prop to this component and to have it know whether or not it's being deleted, we can say, does the loading delete ID equal to this particular comment that we're iterating through's ID, just like this. Okay, so let's try this out. So let me try clicking delete. And you saw that only that one had the spinner there, and that is thanks to this loading delete state. We store the ID of this particular post, so watch up here. So that's pretty cool. I think that's cool. The other option to do it, like I said before, was with like how we did it with the posts, where we would create another function inside of our comment item, which would call our onDelete function inside of here. And then this function would return a promise when it is successfully deleted. And then inside of the component, we would know locally whether or not it was successful, and we could show the loading state and blah, blah, blah. But in this case, we sort of are having a single state variable that is acting as the loading state of all of them. So hopefully you find those two methods sort of interesting, and yeah, just a different way to handle loading state. But yeah, so now we can delete comments and create them. So here is a new comment. I can post this, and then if I don't like it, delete it. Very cool. If you go to our database and check this out in real time, if I create a new comment, hey there, dude, nice, post. If I post this, watch on the left. That document appears instantly. And if I go to the posts, there's 4 comments, which matches our client state here. Perfect. If I create a new one, nice. That updates to 5. If I delete this, 4. 3, the loading state works, the batch writes are working, and that wraps up our commenting functionality. All right, you guys, so now that we have built all of this amazing community functionality, we have been able to create communities, we have been able to create posts within communities, comment on those posts, delete the posts and the comments, vote on those posts, change the profile image of communities. We have done all of this amazing stuff. The next logical step would be to actually be able to navigate between these communities that we are in using our drop-down directory menu up here. Long ago, I mentioned that we were going to cover this kind of more towards the end because it is a simple component and we're already doing the heavy lifting for it. We're already fetching our community snippets. We just have to build out the UI of this component. So from within here, we are able to create communities successfully with our create community modal. The only thing that is missing is the actual list of communities that we are in. If we go to our demo here to look at what I'm talking about, let me expand this a bit so we can see that. We are going to build out the menu items here for each of the communities that we are in and have a moderating section for the ones that we ourselves have created, as well as our option to create the community. And this is going to, at the top in the menu, show which community we are currently in. In our app right now, it's just by default home and there's nothing else going on. We have just sort of hard-coded the home in there and it doesn't matter what community we're in, it just always says home. Now we want to build this component to actually know what community that it is currently in and display that as well as the profile picture and allow us to navigate between these communities. And in building this component, we are going to build another custom React hook and have it manage the global Recoil state for our directory. And the reason we are making this global using Recoil and having a hook manage the state for us is because we are also going to build the functionality to be able to open the directory from the create post link on the home page here. If they click on the create post link and they're not in a community, we open this menu to allow them to choose which community they want to be able to post in. I know on Reddit that you don't have to necessarily post in a community, but it seems like posting in communities is much more popular than just posting in not a community. So I've decided to build the functionality to only be able to post in communities. It is going to prompt them to choose which community they would like to post in, and then they can go directly to that. So for that reason, because we have this component that is far away from this component in the React component tree, we are going to manage the state of this menu from Recoil and using a custom hook so that both components can toggle and read from that state. Okay, so I just did some quick version control here to get us all set up to develop this new feature, and I'm just going to remove all of these files because we do not need them anymore, and I'm going to go back into the directory file from way back that we haven't touched in a while. And if you remember, we created just the skeleton of our communities component, which if I open it up, I believe that is where our create community modal is right now. So that is how we are actually able to open up this modal and create a community. So essentially all we need to add in this component is just the actual list of our community snippets and create a menu list item for each one. So what we're going to do is start off by pulling in that value from our Recoil state community state value. So we can declare that up here in a variable called mySnippets, and we can use our useRecoil value hook, and we can pass this our community state atom, community state, and we only want to grab my snippets from community state. We don't really care about anything else in this component. Okay, so underneath our community modal here, let's add in a box component from Chakra, and this is going to be the container of all of the list items. So the first component inside of this box is going to be a piece of text, and that text is going to say in all caps, my communities. So let's open this up so we can see what we're doing here. Okay, on this outermost container, we are going to add some styling here. So we're going to give this a margin top of 3, as well as a margin bottom of 4. On this my communities text, we are going to give this a padding left of 3 and some bottom margin of 1. We are also going to make it quite small and make the font size 7 point, and the font weight is going to be 500. And we're also going to make it gray 500, just like this. So underneath our create community menu item, we are going to actually loop through our community snippets, and for each one, we are going to create a menu list item with a community name in it. So we can take our snippets and map through them, and for each snippet, we want to actually build out some piece of HTML. And that piece of HTML is going to be its own component called menu list item, but for now, let's just make an empty div with the snippets .community ID so that we can see something showing up on the screen there. So now we can actually see the list of my snippets. Okay, so now let's actually build out the menu list item component, and this is going to lead us into building out the Recoil atom for our directory state. So inside of our directory folder here, I'm going to create a new file called menu list item.tsx. We can use our snippet. So the first prop that we're going to take into this component is going to be called display text. And this is going to be of type string, and it's actually what's going to be displayed in the menu item here, in the list here, the r/community ID. The second prop we're going to take in is going to be the link to that community. So when the user clicks on it, they can actually go inside of that community. The third prop we're going to take in is going to be an icon, and this is going to be of type icon type. So make sure this imports from React icons. Our fourth prop is going to be an icon color, and this is going to help us differentiate between the moderator list and the regular community list. And this is going to be of type string. And the fifth prop is going to be the image URL, which is going to be the profile picture of the image. And this is going to be actually optional because not all communities have to have an image URL, so sometimes it's going to be undefined. So down here, we can destructure these: display text, link, icon, icon color, and image URL. And the HTML for this component is relatively straightforward. It's only about 10 to 20 lines. So each menu list item is going to actually be a menu item component from Chakra. So menu item, make sure that imports from Chakra. And we are going to apply some styling to these. We're going to give all of these a width of 100%, a font size of 10 point, some hover styling, which is going to have a background of gray 100. And we're also going to have an onClick function that is going to route us to this community. But for now, we're just going to leave it as an empty callback. We will come back to this when we build out our custom hook for our directory. Then inside of this menu item, we want to have a flex container. On our flex, we're going to make the vertical alignment center. And inside of here, we're going to add a condition to check for the existence of an image URL. Because if the image URL exists, we want to display that. And if it does not, we're just going to display our famous Reddit icon. So if there is an image URL, we are going to have an image component from Chakra. The source of our image component is going to be our image URL. We are going to give this a border radius of full to make it round, and we're going to give it a box size of 18 pixels. And we're going to give it a margin right of 2 to add some space between this and the text that is coming up. If there is no image, we're just going to display an icon, and the icon is going to be the icon prop that we are going to pass in. We are going to give this a font size of 20 and some margin right of 2. And we're going to give this a color equal to the icon color prop. Then underneath this ternary operator is where we're actually going to show the display text. So let's go back to our app so we can see what we're doing here. And let's actually bring this component in so we can get rid of this div here. And we are going to render our menu list item component that we just created. We can pass this a key of just snippet.communityID because that's a unique identifier. The icon we're going to pass in is going to be FA Reddit. Our display text is going to be a string, and we are going to use a template literal here, and it's going to be r/then snippet.communityID. So it's like r/Shaddy's group or r/baking. Okay, let's save that so it formats. We're going to pass in a link string so that our Next.js router can take us to this link, and the link is going to be /r. Make sure to include the / before the r here so that our router knows to place it after the domain name. So it's /r/ then it's going to be our snippet.communityID, and that is that. And so this is what we're going to pass to our router. Our icon color is going to be blue 500, and our image URL is going to be snippet.imageURL. And so the reason we have a prop for our icon color as well as our icon is because we are going to reuse our menu list item component up here in a little bit when we display the list of communities that we are moderating, because they're going to vary slightly. And so that's why they're passed in as props and not used directly in the menu list item. Okay, so let's save this. Okay, so I think the reason that it's not showing the image URL here is because we added the functionality of uploading community images after we have created this community and after the community snippet was inserted into my user's community snippets array. And so I think the community snippet does not have the image URL right now. Okay, and this is because we built that functionality afterwards. So all we would have to do to fix this is to just go back to the community page and then join and leave the community. And that should put a new snippet with the image URL in it. So if I leave the community, that should have been deleted from the database. So yeah, I'm not in that community anymore. And if I rejoin, it should have created a new one, yeah, with the image URL. So now if I open up the directory, the image is there. Okay, so now let's quickly build out the moderating section of this list because it's extremely similar to this. We just have to apply a filter. So if we go to our demo, you pretty much just have the moderating section and then the My Communities section. And the ones you are moderating also do appear in the My Communities list. That's how it appears on Reddit, so that is how I made it. So then inside of our directory here, the component for our moderating section is going to be very, very similar to this. So I'm just going to grab that entire box and paste it up above here like this. We can get rid of the create community menu item. And this is going to say, instead of my communities, it's going to say moderating. Okay, so if I save this, now we have a duplicate list. So we need to apply a filter here to this snippets array. So before we map through it, we want to actually filter these to only be the ones that we are moderating. And to do that filtering, we can look at each snippet in this array and see if the isModerator key exists and is true. And then once that filter is done, we can then map through those results. Okay, so I save this and we can see that there are no communities that I'm currently moderating. Okay, so the user I'm currently logged in as is clearly the creator of this community because I can change the image, right? Only creators and admins of this community can do that. However, it is not showing up in my moderating section of the list, even though I clearly am the creator of this community. So it should definitely be in here. I should definitely be a moderator. And the reason that is because what we had to do just a few minutes ago with having to leave and then rejoin the community to allow that new image URL functionality to be included in the snippet. So currently it's built so that even if you create a community and you're added as a moderator, if you leave that community that you created and then rejoin, you're not automatically added back as a moderator. And we can actually add that functionality because I do think it makes sense now that I think about it to, if you leave a community that you created and then rejoin, maybe you should be added back as a moderator. So what we can do to fix that is go to our useCommunityData hook and go back to our onJoinCommunity function. So inside of our joinCommunity function, all we have to do is on this new snippet that we're creating, we can add that isModerator key here, and we can just check, like, does this user's ID equal the CommunityData.creator ID? That's all we have to add. So I think now that we've added this code, we should be able to leave this community and then rejoin, and now it should end up in my moderating section. Yeah, because if I go to the database now and go back to community snippets, I should be a moderator, right? Because I rejoined a community that I am the creator of. And so now it's showing up in here successfully, which is perfect. But I'm kind of glad we discovered this because I think it does make sense to just be automatically added back as a moderator. And also, if I change the community image here to be, say, this Google logo, if I save those, save that change. Now, if I were to refresh this page, the community snippet should have that updated image because the community snippet and the community are pointing to the same image URL. And so when I update the community image, the community snippet is also going to be updated as well. So that is super cool. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the actual Recoil atom that represents the state of our directory menu. So the openness of it, as well as the currently selected directory menu. And then we can build out our custom hook to manage that state so that we can toggle the openness from the create post link on the home page. Okay, so inside of our directory here, I forgot how confusing it is to have the directory component called the directory, and we have a file directory. It's kind of confusing. Inside of our folders, inside of atoms, let's create a new file called directory menu atom.ts. Okay, so we can import atom from Recoil. So just like all of our other atoms, we can create a TypeScript interface to model what this state is going to look like. So for our directory menu state, we can create an interface called directory menu state. And there's only going to be two things in here. The first one is going to be is open. Is this thing open or not? Similar to our modals. And then the second thing is going to be the selected menu item. So what is currently selected in this dropdown menu? And right now I'm going to make this of type any, but we're going to actually come up here and create a type for our selected menu item. And this is going to tie into the props that we are passing to our menu list item here. So bear with me if that doesn't make sense. I'm just going to close the left-hand side directory, and let's create the type for our directory menu. So directory menu item. So our directory menu item type is going to have the same properties that we are passing as props to our menu list item here, because for each menu list item, we're pretty much creating a directory menu item. And so they're going to have the same properties. So this is going to have display text of type string, a link of type string, an icon of icon type, make sure that imports from React icons, icon color, which is a string, as well as an optional image URL. And also, I think I forgot in the communities component, the icon color we want to pass to our menu list item in the moderating section. It is not supposed to be blue 500. It is supposed to be brand 100, which is that Reddit orange. So in the directory menu item, if this did not have an image, the icon would be orange, which would sort of indicate that we are a moderator of that community. And that's sort of how we differentiate them there. That's not super important though. That's just a very small detail. Okay, back to our directory menu item here. Now we can declare this selected menu item as type directory menu item. And we can also create a variable to represent our default menu item. And our default menu item is just our home page, right? It's the home text with the sort of home icon. That's sort of our default when we're not in a community. So we can say export const default menu item, and we're exporting it because we're going to need it in our custom hook. And this is going to be of type directory menu item. And our display text for this is going to be home. Our link is just going to be the index route. The icon is going to be an icon called TI home. So make sure this imports from React icons /TI. And the icon color is going to be black. So this is sort of why we have those props for icon and icon color, because they're not always the same. And so I wanted to make like sort of a generalized solution where we could really have any icon or any icon color. And so that's why they're being passed as props. Then what we can do is, as usual, create a variable to represent our default state for this atom. So we can say export const default menu state, and this is going to be of type directory menu state. And we want the isOpen parameter to be false because we want it to be closed when the user opens the application. And our selected menu item is going to be our default menu item. It's going to start off as the home item, and then it'll change depending on what community they are in if they navigate to a community. All right, now we are ready to actually create the Recoil atom. So we can say export const directory menu state is equal to atom, and this is going to be of type directory menu state. Then inside of here, our default key can just be directory menu state, and the default initial value of state is going to be our default menu state, just like this. Awesome, and that is it for this file. This is all that represents our directory menu. So this is like the most important part here, that we have just two pieces of state representing our directory menu. We have whether it is open or not, as well as the currently selected menu item, which is just one of those community list items. Okay, so this is how we're going to use this isOpen parameter from our directory menu state. So if we go back to our directory, so Chakra's menu component allows us to pass in a prop called isOpen. So for example, if I pass this as false, it's never going to let me open this thing. So the reason this is useful is because we can pass in the value of our isOpen state from our Recoil atom to our directory menu here. And that is how we are going to be able to actually toggle the openness of this menu from other components. And this should become even more clear when we build out the custom hook. So let's start working on that. So let's go into our hooks folder and let's create a new hook called useDirectory.tsx. Okay, use our snippet here. And we are not going to be taking in any props, so we can get rid of this. Okay, and we are just going to return for now an empty object. And then we can get rid of the return type, react.xc. So just like our other custom hooks, this hook is going to manage our recoil state of our directory menu. And then we can access this state from any other component just by calling this hook. So we can pull in our directory state by saying directory state, set directory state is equal to use recoil state. And we want to pass in our directory menu state atom, so make sure that imports. All right, so before we actually build the rest of this out, I want to show you how this is going to be used inside of our directory to provide some clarity. So the first thing we're going to return from our hook is going to be the actual value of our directory state, which if you remember has two pieces, is it open and the currently selected menu item. So inside of our directory here, now we can pull in that state from our custom hook. So we can say const is equal to use directory, and it does not want to import. There we go. Okay, and now we can actually pull in that directory state. And so the value we want to pass to our isOpen prop of our Chakra menu is going to be our directory state.isOpen. So hopefully this is starting to make more sense now. So I'm getting an error here, use directory. Oh, I think I have to save this. Okay, that's probably why. Yeah, okay. Okay, so now it's false. So we're not actually able to toggle the state of that yet, but we're going to work on that. But now we can control whether or not this menu is open using our recoil atom. So let's go back to our hook here. All right, so let's create the sort of skeleton outline of this component here. It's a pretty simple hook. It's not super long at all. So the first function is going to be called toggle menu open, and this is going to be actually responsible for changing the open state of our directory menu. And this is the function we're going to be able to call from anywhere in our app to actually open up our directory. So we can create this as a function, and inside of here, all we want to do is call set directory state and toggle the value of the isOpen parameter to be the opposite of what it currently is. So I want to update the isOpen property of our directory menu state, and I want to change it to be the value that is opposite to the current value. That's sort of what toggling is, on, off, on, off. So if it's off, I'm going to turn it on, and if it's on, I'm going to turn it off. So now if I save this, and I return this from our hook, just like that, then I go back to the directory component, and I pull that toggle function in, toggle menu open, and then I pass this to the onClick of our menu button here, which is our, like this thing here in our nav bar. If I pass this to the onClick, so if I say onClick is equal to toggle menu open, now I should actually be able to open up the menu. So how cool is that? And this is the same function we are going to call from the post link from the homepage. In a community page, it's just going to take us to the submit page, but on the home page, it's going to call that toggle menu open function, which is going to open up this menu. So now at a global level, we can toggle the openness of this menu thanks to our Recoil atom and this hook. Let's go back and continue building out this hook. The other function that we're going to have in here is going to be the function that is triggered when the user actually clicks on a menu item in the directory. So we're going to call that onSelectMenuItem, and this is going to take in a menu item, and it is going to be of type directory menu item, which we, if you remember, exported from our Recoil atom file. So we're going to take this and we want to update our directory state to have this passed in menu item as the selected menu item. So we can update selected menu item to be the menu item that was clicked on. So when I click on Tesla Motors, for example, that menu item is going to be sent to this function, and then our directory state is going to be updated with the Tesla Motors menu item. And probably the most important thing is when the user clicks on a menu item, we actually want to take them to that route, right? Like they're clicking on it to go there, not just for fun. So we need to bring in our router from NextRouter. So router is equal to useRouter. And after we set state, we can call router.push, and we can tell the router to take us to the menu item's link. So hopefully this is all starting to piece together. Now let's actually go see how we're going to use this onSelectMenuItem from within our menu. So if we go back to our menu list item component, which again represents a single item in our list here. So when we click on one of these menu items, we actually want to call that onSelectMenuItem function and set that state to be the one we clicked on. So at the top, we can pull that function in from our hook, use directory, and we can bring in onSelectMenuItem. And in this onClick function here, we actually want to change this to call that onSelectMenuItem function. So inside of this function here, we can package up all of the props that are passed to this component into an object that is of type directory menu item, because that is the type of the argument that is required by our onSelectMenuItem function. And so that is why we are passing in all these props, and that is why our directory menu item type has the exact same properties of the props we are passing into this component here. So we want to pass this an object, and again, this object is of type directory menu item, which has property display text, link, icon, icon color, and image URL optional. So now if I actually click on a different community, new, we should actually be taken to that community page. So let's click on it. Okay, so the community updated and the data updated, but the image is still showing. Okay, I think on the community index page here, yeah, so we need to, I initially declared this as an empty dependency array in this use effect here. We need to add a dependency of community data. And so this is so that every time we actually change communities and community data changes, we update our current community state to be that latest community data. Before, without the dependency, it was just running a single time. We want to run this every single time the user navigates to a new community and community data changes. So if I save this now that should update. All right, so the header updated, but you'll notice that the post did not. We're still seeing the post from Shadi's group. And the reason that is we have to go do the exact same thing in our getPosts function use effect in our post component. We need to add a dependency of community data. So if we go to our post component here, yeah, so we created this use effect, and it's currently only built to run once because there's an empty dependency array, and we want to call this function getPosts every single time the community changes because we want to get the post for the community that the user is currently in. So we can add a dependency here of community data, which is being passed as a prop to this component. And so now if I save this, it should fetch the post from this community, which currently there are none. So let's create one just for fun. Inside new, blah, 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 random text. Okay, post. Cool. So now I'm in new, and I see this post I just made. If I go back to Shadi's group, it should like refetch all that data. So now all that data updates, the community data updates, the header updates and everything. If I go back to new, the data updates. So perfect. So all we had to do was just add dependencies in our use effects to make them trigger every time we switch communities. Okay, and also you'll notice that when I switch communities, when I click on one of these menu items, the menu just stays open, right? It'd probably be nice if it just closes once I click on a menu item. That kind of makes sense. So all we have to do that is if we go to our useDirectory hook here, so right after we push the link to our router, we can call our toggle menu open function to close the menu. So we can say if the directory state dot is open, then we want to close it. We can call toggle menu open just like that. And so now when I click on a menu item, it should close it. Very nice. That is beautiful. Okay, so what we want to do now is actually change it so that the display text of the community as well as that icon are displaying in our menu here. Because right now it's always just home, because I think we have home hard-coded in the menu button. So if we go to our directory here, I think, yeah, so we just have home here. We need to change the icon as well as the text to be dynamic and pull from our state, which we're already grabbing from our hook here. Okay, so inside of here, let's change this home text to actually be the currently selected menu item's display text. So we can say directory state dot selected menu item dot display text. So now if I save this, we should see Shaddy's group in the thing there. Awesome. So now it's actually the community we're currently in. So if I go to new, it updates. Now we need to change the icon. So what I'm going to do is above this icon, I'm going to add a ternary operator to check for the existence of the selected menu item's image URL. And if the image URL exists, we want to display that instead of the icon. And if it doesn't exist, we will display the icon. Okay, so let's check for the existence of the directory state.selectedMenuItem.image URL. If this exists, let's show an image from Chakra, with the source of the image being the image URL from the selected menu item. And if it does not exist, we are just going to show the icon. And the icon, we want to pass in the as prop as the directory state dot selected menu item dot icon, just like that. And we want to make the color of this icon the icon color from the directory state. So we can say directory state dot selected menu item dot icon color. Okay, so let's save this so that it formats. Okay, so now we can see the icon of this community is actually in this component here. So let's make it so we can see the image if it exists. So we're going to make the source of this image equal to the directory state no autocomplete dot selected menu item dot image URL. Okay, and we're going to make the border radius full so that it is circular, and we want to make this a box size of 24 pixels, and we can give this some margin right of 2. So now if I go to a community that actually has an image URL like Shaddy's group, it should show there, which it does. Perfect. That is so cool. And if I expand this out, we can see that it says our Shaddy's group, and it actually has the icon or the image for that community. So that is super cool. All right, so we are very, very close to being done our custom hook. There's just one more thing we have to add, and this has to do with what I'm about to show you. So right now, our directory menu is showing properly. It's currently Shaddy's group, and it has our image URL, which is perfect. But what happens if I refresh? And we're starting off on the Shaddy's group page. You can see that it's initialized as the home icon. And that is, if you remember, the default value of our directory menu. We have the default menu item, which is our home. So right now, it is not built to know what community it's in if you're starting off on that community page, right? It has to do with, again, that refreshing thing. So the initial state of this needs to be toggled if we're starting off on the community page. Because right now, we're only updating that state if we actually click on something, right? But it doesn't know how to update by itself based on the value of current community. So that's what we have to do. So let's go into our useDirectory hook, and we can handle this very similar to how we handled the refreshing problem for the community data, as well as the single post page view. So we can create a use effect that is essentially going to listen to the current community value, and based on what that is, it is going to update the selected menu item by itself without having to click on one explicitly. So we're going to have this use effect have a dependency of the community state value's current community, because we already solved the refreshing problem for the community data. So the community data is being fetched on refresh, and so current community state is being updated. So if we listen for updates to the current community state, we will also be able to update our directory menu item to be that current community's item. So we have this like really nice data flow triggering thing, like where the community updates and then that triggers another thing, and it's just a nice data flow. So at the top here, we're going to need to bring in our community state value, so we can create a variable called community state value. and we can use our hook use Recoil value, and we want to pass in our community state atom. Then as a dependency on this use effect, we want to listen to changes in the community state values current community. So now every time current community updates, we are going to trigger this use effect. So I'm just going to destructure the community state value and grab the current community from it, like this, current community. Okay, so now we can check for a truthy value of the current community, and if there is one, we want to update our directory state to be that community as a menu item. And this is extremely useful for the refresh case because we're basically telling this component how to update itself without needing to explicitly click on one of those menu items, because this use effect is going to listen to changes in the value of current community, which is updated by our useCommunityData hook. So we can say if current community, we can call our setDirectoryState function, take the previous value, and we want to update our selected menu item, and we want to set the selected menu item to be an object of type directory menu item. So we need this to have all of the properties that is required by that state here, which are all of these things here, directory menu item. Our display text, we can make r /, then we can take the ID of the current community. So we can say current community dot ID. The link we can set to be /r / current community dot ID. Okay. TypeScript is freaking out right now. This looks, all these red underlines. The next one is going to be our image URL, which is going to be the current community.image URL. And then we just want to pass in a fallback icon in case the image URL does not exist. Then it's just going to show our FA Reddit icon by default. And the default color of that is just going to be blue 500, just like this. Perfect. So now TypeScript is happy. Thank God all of those red underlines are gone. Okay, so now if I save this updated. Okay, so now if I refresh, the menu item should no longer be home by default. It should update to be Shaddy's group, which it did. The image URL is there, and you can see that. Perfect. That is so cool. So I can go into here, I could refresh this, and it's no longer just going to be the home value because it's picking up that there is a current community in state here, and then it's updating our directory menu item to be that current community, and as well as its image URL. Shaddy's group, can refresh. Awesome, that is amazing. And then what we want to quickly do is make it so that if they click on the logo here, it just takes them to the home page. That's pretty much how every website works. If you click on the logo, it just takes you home. So let's go back to our navbar component here. Okay, and on our logos here, this flexbox represents our logos, if you remember, from way back from like part 1. We can add an onClick here to these logos, and we can call that select menu item function from our hook. So we can bring that in. Up here, we can say const is equal to useDirectory. And we can bring in our onSelectMenuItem function, and then our onClick for the logos can call our onSelectMenuItem function and pass in the default menu item, which if you remember is just the home value. It's the home text with the home icon. I'm actually going to make the cursor equal to pointer now because it's clickable. So now if they click on this, it just takes them home. And the menu item updates to just be the home icon as well as the home text. And then go back, Shaddy's group, it updates. That is amazing. So the very last thing we have to do related to our directory here is just go back to our create post component and actually have it open up the directory if there is no current community, meaning that they are on the home page. So if we go back to our create post link component here, we already have created this onClick function that routes the user to the community submit page. So if I click on this, I go to the submit page of Shaddy's group. We just want to add a condition to check if there is no community ID, let's open up the directory. Because if there is no community ID, that means that they're on the home page. All we have to do is after grabbing the community ID off of the router, we can check, is there even a community ID? If there is, then we want to call router.push and take them to the submit page. And if there is not a community ID, we want to open our directory menu. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to bring in our toggle menu function from our hook. So we can say const is equal to useDirectory, bring in our toggle menu item function. Then down here, we can call toggle menu open. And we actually want to return out of this function if this if statement is triggered, because we don't want to open the menu as well. So if I save this now, so if there is a community ID, which right now there currently is, the create post link is going to take me to the submit page. But when I'm on the home page, which we have not created yet, when we add the create post link to our homepage, it's actually going to open up the menu. And so that is how we're actually going to open up our directory menu from the homepage. And the homepage is extremely simple to make because all we're going to do is just drop in components that we have already created, and it's just going to magically work. All right, I think I'm going to leave it there for part 5. We have covered an absolutely insane amount of stuff in this video. I honestly can't believe how much functionality we have built into our app now. We have covered pretty much all of the functionality of our entire build. We are now able to create communities, join and leave communities, change the image of the community if we are the admin. We can navigate through our communities, create posts in communities, vote on posts, comment on posts, delete the posts, delete the comments. So much functionality. Oh my gosh, there's a lot here. And we are at a super cool place now. And all that really is left is just a few filler components to make it really that finished Reddit product. They're very, very simple components. We have already done all of the hard work. And then of course, deployment. So part 6 is going to be much shorter, and its main focus is going to be on security rules and hosting and deployment with Firebase so that we can actually get this thing into production for you guys to have a real finished product. So part 6 will be much shorter. That should be coming a lot faster than this part because it is going to be a lot shorter. So I hope to get it out as soon as possible. If you guys enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And please join my Discord. The link is in the description below. I would love to see you in there. We are a growing community and we want you to be a part of it. So thank you so much once again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.